You are screen sharing and presenting to everyone. This Hangout on air is live. And now, hopefully you see that we started and there's the first screen.
On
air is live. Ah, and I hear myself. We're good.
Okay, so I muted myself.
Great.
I mean, yeah. Okay. So
You want to get started?
I think we're on, and there's. I see that it says that there's one watching now.
Actually, Claude, come here. Let's switch spots for this piece because it's picking up through my microphone. You know?
Yeah, but that's okay. Sure, we can do that. Hold on, people. We're almost there. We're almost there.
We'll be in group very quickly.
We are almost there.
Yeah.
Good catch. So,
This is good because I can see what it looks like on this side.
yeah, and you can also see, you know, the current. It says what it said one watching, and then it may still say how many people are waiting or something like that. So anyway, welcome to the Cloud Working Group. For those of you who are online, we were asked to try to broadcast this session. So Tracy Berardi from OMG has done her magic and set up the YouTube live channel. This is not gamers sharing their gaming screen, which is normally what happens on YouTube Live. But this is the first, the inaugural meeting of the new Cloud Working Group. Today, September 25, broadcast from Ottawa, Canada, Ontario, Canada, where we're meeting. We are still assembling some participants in the physical room here in Ottawa, and we expect a few more. At this point, we have 8 people in the room. We did expect this to be a fairly small meeting, but we hope that the broadcasting is going to bring us some more people. In theory, we're here for the next 4 hours. I do not know if this will last 4 hours or not. It depends on the Q&A and the discussion.
So our chat box is active, and Carolyn's here and Anil Sharma. And I think we might need to unplug the Jabra and just make sure my laptop too is muted. I know that it is, but they don't hear audio yet.
What do you mean they don't hear audio?
Carolyn said, "Hi, Claude. I don't hear anything yet. Will there be audio?"
I know, but
the Jabra
it doesn't work on our computer. But
let's make sure that I'm unmuted.
Well,
Sorry, going all IT on that.
sorry. Yeah, you are unmuted. So.
Okay, so it should be broadcasting now. I see our volume indicator going up and down.
Oh, okay, yeah, I see that, which means we're not muted.
And then when it comes to sharing, I pick my application window, share. So now this thing comes on the bottom. Google Hangouts is sharing a window with.
Okay, but does it say we're broadcasting?
Yes. Yes. I can. You're screen sharing, stop broadcast. So it's.
Okay, yeah, all right.
So in
now
theory,
we need
it
to
should
check
be-
that they're hearing us.
Yeah. So I'll go over to this other. Thank you for.
Oh,
See what-
God. Thanks for your patience, if you can hear me.
Can you hear?
This-
Audio is working. Audio is working.
The audio is working.
Audio is working.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Since we're in Canada, I need to say it in both languages. Okay, so yeah, there used to be a rule where I worked once that every minute would start 7 minutes late, and that was a statistical study we made
Really?
because of all the logistics of getting the teleconference going. So we used to say, oh, we're not in the same time zone, we're plus 7 minutes.
And she sees the screen too.
Okay, good. How many people do we have online? Only
We have 5.
5 online and 4 and 4, 8 here, so 13 people total, and we expect a few more. We said this is just after lunch hour at the physical meeting here in Ottawa, and because we're in a civilized country, they have dessert, and because they have dessert, it's harder to get people together back in the group. So without losing more time, thank you for being here. And I'm going to switch to, we have some slides, of course. We wouldn't do a meeting without slides, right? We wouldn't know what to do. Purpose of the meeting is to reconvene or convene for the first time as a mixed physical plus virtual meeting, the Cloud Working Group, CWG, of the Object Management Group, which is a successor to the Cloud Standards Customer Council. And we're going to tell you a little bit more about the history of that. The purpose of the meeting is obviously to sort of establish who we are, what we do, what is our work program, and how are we going to organize ourselves. So there's going to be some substance to the meeting, but it's
Keep talking. I'm just going to play with something like
partially organizational. And in particular, we're going to discuss how often and how we will meet in the future in order to offer you the most opportunities to participate and to get involved. Because one of the recurring themes of the discussion is going to be that this is an open process, and the Object Management Group has some very specific guidelines and rules, actually policies and procedures about the openness of the meeting to people. So we're going to explain all that, and everyone is encouraged to contribute, including non-OMG members. We're going to explain a little bit better what are the constraints about that. And so those of you who participated in the CSCC before may have noticed that there was a steering committee, and just about everything was directed by the steering committee and was sort of pushed out to the members. I think the co-chairs of this group are trying to be a little bit more of establish a little bit more of a bidirectional or a many-to-many process, where the co-chairs are only here to orchestrate things and organize things, but it's really the members who are going to decide what they do, and I'm going to go a little bit more over what it is that we do. So we have an agenda which includes going around the table with introductions, and it's going to be maybe a little bit harder for the people on the line, but we can ask them to type a few things in the chat box to introduce themselves. We're going to talk about the governance, and in particular, there's if you wish, a point of order that will come early, which is to confirm or change or whatever, make a decision about the co-chairs of the working group, and how we will in the future evolve the governance structure of the group. Then we're going to talk about the transition from the CFCC to the. Should I stay in this in this form?
There's a I'm figuring out the bug on YouTube side. It won't show when we have from presenting view this way, but it will show from the grid view.
Okay.
And so they weren't seeing the agenda.
All right.
But now
Okay.
they-
Well, thanks for fixing that. See, I have, without Tracy, I'm lost. So we're going to talk about then go over the transition from the Cloud Standards Customer Council to the Cloud Working Group. We did a webinar in July about this, like around the time when we made the transition, July 23rd. There was a webinar. We have a Bright Talk channel for public webinars, which we've been using extensively over the last several years. And we're going to repeat some of that material, not all of it. We'll try to go a little bit faster. We're going to talk about how we communicate. So we'll show you our webpage, our wiki page, etc. Then we have a presentation by Stephen Woodward from Cloud Perspective on the ISO IEC Subcommittee 38 work. And then we'll talk about the the work program of this group, its deliverables, its roadmap, and then its schedule of meetings. And then we should be able to, I can see the entire screen now. There's something else at the bottom here that I should be able to show at the bottom of this page. I don't know if the remote attendees see the entire page or not, but there's some Q&A and feedback and adjournment at the end. So that's our schedule. So we're slightly late, but not too much. So we're going to go around the table here in the room. So basically, your name, your organization, and just a few words about your interest or your past involvement, if you want, just to introduce yourself. And then we'll try to facilitate people online doing the same thing for us. So we're going to start here.
I'm John Draga. I'm from Micro Focus, responsible for core products. And our interest is we're coming out with Corba products that run on cloud and Docker.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. Okay, thanks. Stephen?
Steve Woodward, Cloud Perspectives, involved in a lot of different standards groups, including ISO, as well function point sizing, as well estimation. I did contribute to the initial work with the Cloud Standards Customer Council for the practical guide as well as SLAs. I always enjoyed working with Claude and look forward to the next steps.
I'm representing Technology Integration Group based in Canada as a solution provider, and we're primarily focusing on promoting with the federal government as solutions by being contracted in Toronto. Adopted both the provincial contracts we have as well as the federal government.
Good, that's very important. I mean, one of the reasons we're organizing some of these meetings, this one and others in Canada, is because we really want to make an outreach to our Canadian friends. And some of us are joking that we want to know the people in the immigration department in case things continue to go from bad to worse. But no, seriously, I'm very glad that you do that.
I'm Nancy Smallwood, and I work for Vertex Inc., based outside of Philadelphia. I'm relatively new to OMG. I just joined earlier this year, and I've been part of the retail task force and working with John Pavitz. I'm an enterprise data architect, so my other half is I work in the architecture group. And Vertex has its own cloud solution as far as our products are deployed. We have our own cloud solution. Plus, we also utilize Amazon, Google. So my other hat has a strong.
Fantastic. You know, actually, when we had one big cloud forum in the early years of the CSCC, I think that was in Boston, there was or Cambridge, Mass, there was a one-day forum on the cloud that was organized by the CSCC. One of the most interesting presentations was from Kroger, because they were explaining some of the interesting things about cloud platforms in the retail in the retail sector. So I still remember that presentation. I can't remember the name of the gentleman, but
Seth.
no. But you're talking about Cess Proctor. You're thinking about Cess Proctor. That was on the data residency. No, but there was a guy from Kroger. So it opened my eyes to the impact of the cloud in the retail industry.
I'm Samson, who is Department of Commerce, National Oceanic Administration. My line of business is called Nestes, which is NOAA, medical, satellite data, and information systems. I'm part of what we call the Enterprise Architecture Committee. There's an IPT that was to we kind of oversee the enterprise for Nestes. And we are also working on what we call cloud strategy. And we developed that IPT as well. And at a high level, we're just trying to understand how we migrate our current enterprise cloud. And I'm just here to listen to you guys and have some ideas that I can think about to know.
Perfect. We were joking before other people arrived that we thought that maybe Atem had mistaken the meeting for being about clouds in the sky, because he's with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Organization. So I guess in NOAA, when you use the word cloud, you have to be careful and specify, which sort of clouds you're talking about. Or I thought maybe you had come here to study the effects of the tornado that hit on Friday.
So I'm Curtis Page. I'm CEO of a company called Alpha. We help governments stand up digital services, sometimes in the cloud, sometimes in secure environments. And I've been to, I think, one of the earlier OMG meetings in Hedron, so 4 years ago. And for my interest is to keep my architects and so on the compliance side of what's coming down, standards and so on. So I always want to keep up.
All right. And I'm Claude Baudouin. I'm an independent consultant, but I've also been I co-chair the Business Modeling and Integration Task Force at OMG. I co-chair the Data Governance Working Group, and I co-chair this group, at least for now, until you kick me out in an election. And I don't know at that point whether I will hate you or thank you for doing that. And I've been, in IT all my life. Hello, Karen. Well, Karen, it's a perfect moment. Tracy, introduce yourself.
And hi, I'm Tracy Berardi. I work for the OMG. We launched the Cloud Standards Customer Council back in 2011, and I was program manager for the OMG that worked with our steering committee. Claude was on the steering committee to publish 28 deliverables over the course of that time. And we'll talk a bit about that history. But I'm still with the OMG and helping to support the transition to bringing this a bit closer into the working group process at OMG versus the standalone virtual program we had running before.
So Karen, you're in the hot seat. You just arrived. We're doing a very short introduction.
Great. Karen Schunk, I work with OMG. I do work helping the task forces make connections. I'm here in part because the retail group that I came to OMG when the retail group was created, and they had already done some work in terms of, a template RFP. If you're going to purchase cloud services, what do you need to think about when you're researching that? They'd also done some technical reports about cloud computing for retail, and they were also very concerned about things like data governance, data residency, that sort of thing. So I was just coming to hear what was happening in here, because we used to actually work with the Cloud Standards Customer Council, because we had a lot of, when we were part of NRF, we had a lot of overlapping membership. And so just trying to hear what the plugins are for different task forces.
Very good. Okay, so how many people do we have online?
6.
Okay, so can they intervene and can they type something in the chat box just as a short introduction, name, company, and one line or two about their interest, and then we'll ask Tracy to read that as those answers come in. And in the future, we may try to find a more interactive way to do that. Maybe we'll go back to GoToMeeting. We were trying to test the YouTube live channel, and we were also not knowing how many people we would have. So since our GoToMeeting licenses have some limitations in the numbers of people, we chose this mode. And I know this is not the most easy way for people to intervene, but let's.
I feel younger. When I was looking at that, I was like, oh, I'm getting so old, but we were doing it. We're doing it. And I'm not even,
okay.
old. But,
so
so Carolyn Schock, we have our first client success manager, technical architect at IBM, contributor to the CSCC guide since 2014, which is true. Carolyn's amazing. And Carolyn is co-chair of the Cloud Working Group. Great interest in the intersection of governance and operations, how maturity across domains impacts adoption, in general work to be. And I don't see other comments in here yet from others, but we can watch it another.
Okay, so thank you, Carolyn, for inputting this. Carolyn and I have been talking periodically, so we're going to go into that next section about the governance of the group. But tell me, Tracy, if you see other comments come in, and then we'll interrupt ourselves to talk about the other people. Okay, so. Let me see now. Okay, so here we are, and we've introduced ourselves already. So just in case, and for the people who are online, this is how I more or less look, or this is how I looked a few years ago, and this is Tracy, who always looks this young. And so anyway, that's it. Okay, so we're going to the section of the agenda on cloud working group governance. So because we are a working group of the object management group, we basically follow the OMG policies and procedures, but the policies and procedures actually say fairly little about working groups. There's very little formality about creating a working group. So we addressed this in the spring when we heard that the way the CSCC was working was not going to continue. It took too much effort for some specific people, in particular at IBM, so they wanted to, go back to their day job, essentially. So we decided to create this working group to take over. But creating an OMG working group just means a certain number of people get together and they decide to create the working group, and that's it. There's no approval by higher level bodies. There is one rule, though, which is that the chairs or co-chairs must be OMG members. So that has some impact, because it means, for instance, that when I was thinking of end user companies whose people or representatives could potentially be valuable co-chairs, and there was one company in particular that has contributed to several of the CSCC papers, but their people cannot be co-chairs because their company is not a member of OMG, in spite of my best efforts. So that constrains us a little bit. Okay, a group needs a chair, but it's better to have co-chairs for backup reasons. Obviously, someone can be sick, someone can be on vacation during the time of an OMG meeting. And I also, and the reason I say I seem to have give myself more importance than others is not because of a bias there. It's because when we learned that we needed to do something because the CSCC in its past form was going to, essentially be retired or was losing the level of direct stewardship and involvement that we had before by some people, I proposed that we transform it into a cloud working group of the OMG in order to continue the effort and have a smooth transition. So that put me automatically in the place of being the initial chair. But I said, okay, we need a co-chair or more than one co-chair, and I want to have a representation for a more balanced representation between suppliers and customers of the cloud. So the first person who volunteered to help is Carolyn Schock at IBM. So I was like, hey, You're the only one who's spoken so far. I know the value of the work you've done before in the CSCC. Tag you're it. I hereby, anoint you co-chair. But that was not very democratic, so we needed to get out of that process. Then Lisa Schenkowitz, also from IBM, volunteered, but I said we don't want to have two co-chairs, both from IBM, and that overweighs the vendor side. So Lisa and Carolyn talked in IBMEs, and they decided to swap roles after a year. So we basically have an IBM co-chair, but and this is, IBM deserves a lot of credit for having done so much work to support the CSCC for 7 years. And then we have on the table a request or proposal by David Harris from Boeing, who was in charge only specifically of trade compliance at Boeing, but has actually recently been promoted to a position that still includes trade compliance, but is much broader about governance and compliance. And David is volunteered to be a third co-chair, and Boeing is a member company of OMG, and David has contributed before. So the proposal on the table, basically, and I want to make a decision on that in a reasonably formal way. So the proposal is that for the next year, or until the summer of 2019, that the three co-chairs be Carolyn, myself, and David Harris, and that we basically hold an election once a year, where the members of those members who are present at the meeting, because it's like those who make quorum, etc., and those who make the effort to come are the ones who have the privilege of making decisions. So the proposal, or if you wish, the motion, is to adopt this trio of people, Carolyn, David, and myself, for 1 year, which gives us, no loss of momentum, et cetera, and then we revise this every year, and maybe we'll do staggered thing, but we don't know yet. We can decide. So the question out there for you people who have made the effort of coming is there anyone else who has a burning desire to be a co-chair, and or is there anyone who has an objection to this proposal? And I open the discussion. Any thoughts?
Good.
It's good.
And maybe you should include the vote of hands online.
The what?
Those are the
Yeah, I know. We're asking that. Stephen is nodding. Yeah, is nodding approval. Okay. John is nodding approval. Do we have any reactions online?
So online, we have one more person that just introduced themselves, Jean-Claude Franchuti, CEO of Archemy and professor at NYU. Company is building a portable cloud-based platform to power intelligent, autonomous solutions in various industries. We're interested in cloud portability standards, among other areas.
Okay, people online, you want to indicate, it's a little bit like, during a wedding, is there anyone who wants to speak up and say that they're opposed to this decision? Speak now or forever hold your peace is the traditional formula that the priest intones at this point.
Jean-Claude is good with the co-chair suggestion.
Good, thank you, Jean-Claude. Carolyn, of course, is going to be good with it because I spoke to her and to Dave yesterday, and I said this is the process we're going to follow. And Dave, by the way, Dave Harris was very eager to have this decision made formally because he is going to present to the Society for Information something SIA. No, it's not information. International something. It's about trade and international governance, but not just about IT. And he wanted to put his title on the slides if he was confirmed as being a co-chair because he wants to present on behalf of the OMG, not on behalf of Boeing. He says that'll give me more authority to speak in this meeting. and the meeting is coming up in October, but he had to send his slides yesterday, I think. So he wanted.
In his background, Dave Harris was on the steering committee of the Cloud Council before we transitioned. And
Which
so
means he
you-
has experience about the process too, and the
so they're not
deliverables,
just walking in.
which is, yeah, exactly. It's not a stranger walking in, but at the same time, I really want to open the process, and therefore I'm absolutely ready to put my role back on the, for re-election, or maybe to step away and let other people take the role next year. So I'm not hearing any objections.
No, so I have.
So we're gonna record that,
Yeah.
we had basically unanimous consent in the meeting to go this way. Tracy, I'm gonna ask you if you can put that on the working group page. I mean, I can put it on the wiki, but on the web page, the OMG /cloud web page, to put Dave Harris's name as soon as you can reasonably do it. It doesn't have to be this evening instead of going to the chair's dinner, but and after that, it'll depend how many glasses of wine we will have, but we need to make this official. All right. We're out on time. So we're going to talk about the transition from the CSCC to the cloud working group. And basically, this is a repeat of a slightly adapted repeat of the presentation we give in July. And I'm going to drive the slides and you're going to talk, Tracy?
I have to switch seats with you if I'm going to talk.
Okay, let's do that. And you go through that, and then we'll switch again once we go to the next agenda section.
Okay, so this summer in July is when we officially transitioned from the Cloud Standards Customer Council to the new Cloud Working Group at OMG. And what we did back on July 19th was we held a webinar with our members to explain. And so we've trimmed some of that, but this will be a good background on the program, and I'll talk a bit about how OMG works, the structure. So if you're interested in getting involved in other, standards developing task forces, here's how that works. So getting started, first a little history of the CFCC. The OMG launched this program, this community of practice, back in 2011. Not so much a standards developing group, but a customer council where we were chartered to create deliverables, which would be vendor neutral white papers on important considerations for cloud adoption, like security, interoperability and portability, the content of cloud service agreements. We also got into a series of reference architectures. I think we published 7 at the end of the day. How do you use cloud computing to support IoT or blockchain or e-commerce? So we have, I think, 7 different reference architectures. We started first with the practical guide to cloud computing back when we were, defining cloud computing and explaining the value. So what happened was over the 7 years, we built up a pretty vast library and a lot of webinars, because every time we published a paper, we'd do a webinar with the authors. And I'd say on average, each paper had somewhere between 7 to 12 contributors, and what we would do is we had working groups, and our work was virtual. So we'd send a call for contributors out when we were launching a new project, and it took us something like 12 weeks to finish a paper. And then if we were version updating a current paper, it'd take us 9 weeks. So we worked in those cycles and built up this library of 28 papers. They were being downloaded all the time, a ton of views. And as part of my role, I was program manager. I would share the papers with our liaisons, ISO, NIST, Cloud Security Alliance, a lot of the open source groups. We had a good relationship with the Linux Foundation, would have them in talking about Cloud Foundry, OpenStack. And I think when OMG launched this program, Bill and Richard, the CEO, I think they knew, that a lot of this is going to be going into open source and stuff too. So they said this will be the sweet spot here. But we hit that threshold, and then so we decided now to bring this work in closer to the core of OMG. Let's make it a working group. And in the working group model, it's more, volunteer based too. So it's great to have folks like Claude and Carolyn who, can take the time to help lead the paper. Because when you have 7 people contributing, you need a lead editor. And so we've got a good process. So the idea was we're carrying this over to OMG, and now we're, relaunching as this new entity. So a little background on OMG. OMG has a long history of supporting standards and standards development, about 30 years now. Our headquarters are just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. OMG is a good fast track also to ISO, so some OMG standards become ISO standards. And I think that's one of the big selling points too here when you think of membership is we have a pretty efficient, fast process. And in international membership, somewhere around 300 or so, member companies, a combination of end users, vendors, agencies, universities, research institutions. Modeling has been a big, focus, model-driven architecture at OMG. And you'll see the library has a lot of standards for middleware, software and system modeling, business modeling, ontologies. And why is our work important at the CSCC? So this was the OMG's cloud play, and there's a lot of other standards bodies out there, but now a lot of government and industry organizations are moving towards a cloud first policy, and so I think that's why we had so much readership on our papers. And the papers we were very careful about this too. Wherever there were standards that were applicable, we called them out in the papers and referenced them. If there were opportunities for standardization, we included that. And then any relevant open source projects, that people should know about. So these are really dense, thorough papers.
We didn't say anything about their lengths. They're typically 25, 30 pages in length.
And Claude was saying they're typically about 25, 30 pages in length. Yeah, so they're pretty substantial, but not long reads, Now, OMG, a little bit more so, there's many different task forces, working groups, and I'd say maybe 12 or so verticals, healthcare, finance, government, space, C4I, system assurance, retail. Retail is new, coming out of a partnership with NRF, National Retail Federation, and then the LIMRED team, if you want to.
Right, so workplace benefits domain task force. That's an insurance type of standard between the carriers and so it's outside of the normal area that the insurance standards operate in. So between the carriers and the technology platforms.
Yep. So there's plenty of work streams here to get involved in. So this slide, OMG structure, just a bit about this. So there's an architecture board at OMG, and it sits along these technical committees. There's a platform technology committee, domain technology committee, and the AB architecture board establishes requirements for RFPs, those are requests for proposals, and oversees the consistency of all specs that come out of OMG. So an RFP is an explicit request to OMG members and the community to submit a proposal for a specification meeting requirements stated in the RFP. So it's issued and publicized when we're seeking submissions for a specification. And it's the technical committees, platform and domain, that have the power to issue RFPs within their domain and then make technology spec adoptions through a member voting process. And then these decisions are also blessed by the architecture board and the OMG board of directors. Separate from the RFP process, there's also the concept of RFIs and RFCs. So an RFI, request for information, can be issued ahead of an RFP to help inform development of the RFP. So for example, with the data residency working group at the time, which Claude chairs, is now data governance, put out an RFI to better understand data residency concerns, sort of the state of the industry, and then looking at all that feedback, drafted the RFP for some future work. So and then there's an RFC, which is when you have a specification basically, and it's all cooked up, and you think it's ready to go right in front of OMG for approval. So there are some submitters groups that submit RFCs, sort of bypassing that process and go straight to a member voting process. So each committee here has task forces and special interest groups underneath it. Now, the cloud working group is home under the MARS task force, the middleware and related services task force. So when we publish new deliverables, which are now called discussion papers, OMG discussion papers, the papers are all reviewed by MARS and issued for publication as OMG documents.
I mean, it's the default position that Mars will be the task force to which we go, simply because cloud technologies that may, tend to be horizontal things that cross domains. But there is nothing that prevents us in the policies from going to a different task force for certain papers. So if we had something about software development for the cloud, the middleware task force might say, well, this is not a middleware issue, this is a software development issue. And the OMG has an analysis and design task force which take care of those things. So we could very well, we're not joined at the hip with the Mars task force. It's just the most logical in general, but we can go to others as necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we spent the last OMG meeting cycle presenting in front of Mars, saying, like, take us, give us a home. We have all this great, and they knew of us, but it was a bit of a more formal process.
They're being very nice.
Very nice.
They like us.
So here, pulling out, and my piece is almost done here, and then I give back to Claude, but just some sample OMG standards, some architecture frameworks, some middleware-related services, and some analysis and design. You might be familiar with some of these, and of course, just a snippet, but to give you a sense. And now, Claude, I'll hand it back to you to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the transition and participating in the group.
I notice there's a bit of a lag on the refresh of the slides for the remote attendees.
Yeah, the audio too.
And
so
well, yeah, exactly. So, but at least, I mean, if the audio is also lagging as the same time as the slide, it remains synchronized for them. Maybe there's someone in the control room where it's ready to put the bleep, but push the bleep button like on TV programs. Maybe that's what it is. Okay, so, as part of this transition that Tracy and I designed with the help of other OMG staff and in consultation with people, so we've tried to make things easy and transparent for most people. We didn't want this event of the CSCC as a separate entity being disbanded and this group being forming to be a revolution or a requiring people to do a lot of things and resubscribe and whatever. So all the people who were members of the CSCC were automatically transitioned into participants in this working group in terms of, OMG's membership database and so on. Since there was no membership fee for the CSCC, there is no membership for this group, the Cloud Working Group, as long as people participate in the Cloud Working Group only or in other working groups, okay? So, of course, people who, based on what you just heard from Tracy, if you say, well, we're interested in some of the other work done by the OMG, then of course your companies are more than welcome to get involved in those. But if you want to participate in an OMG task force or special interest group that actually creates standards, then you have to be a participant, and that requires a membership. And there's different levels of membership. There's government, there's academic, there's trial or influencing, and then there's a contributing membership and domain membership and platform membership, and they have a whole range of prices up to approximately $50,000 US dollars a year. But if you want to just attend a meeting of the Cloud Working Group, in theory, you have to receive a formal invitation in order to be able to get into the meeting. But in reality, the co-chairs can basically issue a blanket invitation and say, just register online. And when we have a meeting, we can actually put up a special registration form for just the CWG meeting. And then That's free unless we need to make you pay for lunch or something like that. So today we have the meeting from 1 to 5, so we didn't provide specifically lunch for CWG members. I don't know if some people crashed the lunchroom. We don't particularly watch or count. But if we were to organize one day a full day meeting that officially includes the lunch, there might be, you know, a $75 registration because of the sharing of the cost of the facilities. But otherwise, membership is free. Therefore, please invite all your friends and customers and suppliers and even competitors, etc., to join, because it's free. The email subscriptions that existed, people who used to receive the CSCC communications, like calls for contributors when we start a new paper or calls for reviewing a draft, if you receive those, you will continue to receive those. They will now come from the CWG co-chairs, and it will not be from the same from address, but you will continue to be informed in the same way. And there's a mailing list, cloudwg@omg.org, that everyone is allowed to use to communicate amongst yourselves. People do it fairly little, actually. They could do more of it, more of an open discussion, asking each other for, you know, experience, advice, etc. The only thing is to be careful about the reply all feature, that if one person sometimes says, I'm not interested in this, take me off your list, and then someone replies, you should not have replied all, and then they reply all when they say don't reply all. And we just had 2 weeks ago a mail storm like that. So it's best sometimes to put to send the question and put the mailing list in the BCC, so that people cannot do a reply all by mistake, but only a reply to you.
And large is that? That was on that list.
Sorry, I need a number, but I've said so many numbers. I want to say there's 800 people, because we just took the working group list from the CSCC. We didn't carry over members who are subscribing to our marketing emails. We wanted just to use this list for, you know, the paper. So
For real work, man.
yeah, it's in the hundreds. It's not.
Yeah, I think we are hovering around. I mean, we had 750 members. That was on your slide a few months ago. We have a cloud working group, LinkedIn group, which also has about 700 people. So the mailing list is of that order of magnitude, 700, 800.
And then when we announce papers and stuff, we have access to a much larger list for those announcements, which is now through an OMG subscription.
And when we publish a paper, we will, I mean, OMG Marketing does a press release, typically for every standard that's being endorsed and every RFP that goes out, and for discussion papers also, if we request it. So we have the support of the OMG marketing staff and Marcom staff, and we have multiple means of communication. So you could also look for the Cloud Working Group on LinkedIn and ask to join it. And Tracy and I have the keys to that, and we can approve. You need to make Carolyn a manager of
I didn't want to stop you, but we are actually, because with LinkedIn, we got rid of that group because we couldn't rename it.
Oh, we couldn't rename it? No, okay. We'll talk.
Pull all the people from it.
We'll talk offline. We'll talk offline. We need to do something about it. Okay. So the question of meetings happened, as part of the transition. My thought was, and that's why we're here today, that we needed to resume organizing face-to-face meetings during the quarterly OMG technical meetings, because it's sort of the common cadence at which every group within the OMG, every task force, every special interest group, every working group has this opportunity to have a face-to-face meeting during the OMG technical meeting week, which is quarterly. And it just seemed a good idea to enforce a certain cadence of communication. The CSCC had had a couple of meetings early on and then abandoned them, and the CSCC was only working with teleconferences of the steering committee every 2 months, and then teleconferences among the co-authors of a particular deliverable when that deliverable was in process. But there were no full membership meetings. So here it is, maybe a personal bias of mine, but I like to have, even if it's not that many people, I like to see people, I like people to get to engage. So I'm inclined, if there is enough interest and agreement, to repeat what we're doing today, which is to have maybe at least a half day, and sometimes maybe we can organize a longer one with more outside presenters, face-to-face meetings during the quarterly meeting. So we're here in Ottawa. The next meeting is the second week of December in Seattle. The following one is in March in Reston, Virginia, which is near Dallas Airport. The following one will be in June 2019 in either Dublin or Amsterdam. We haven't chosen yet. The following one will be in September 2019 in Nashville, Tennessee. And the December 2019 meeting, which will also be relatively early in December because of the holidays, that will be in Southern California. So Los Angeles or San Diego, more likely than not, one of those two cities, but it hasn't been decided yet. Personally, I hope it's San Diego. I hate LA. Oh, you think it's going to be Long Beach?
Yeah, Long Beach is good.
Yeah, Long Beach is good. Long Beach is good. We had meetings at that hotel in
the ship.
in well, across from the Queen Mary. Not on, it would be nice to have it on the. We had the dinner. We had the dinner on the Queen Mary.
I actually didn't go to that. It's haunted, right?
So if you've ever wanted to visit the Queen Mary, this could be your opportunity.
Yeah. And there's a wonderful cocktail bar in the Queen Mary that's all Art Deco. It's a wonderful place. The most expensive cocktails I've ever paid for. But anyway, so maybe it's going to be Long Beach. Long Beach is okay. It's not downtown LA, but okay. Anyway, there we go. So any thoughts about that frequency of physical meeting? So my other idea is to have a teleconference. Like a GoToMeeting or something like that in between every 2 physical meetings to have a slightly higher cadence, but of course not ask people to travel. So let's say we're having this meeting now, we would have another face-to-face meeting in Seattle the week of December 10, and maybe in between that would be, let's say, early November to have a conference call as another opportunity for people to connect, and that would give us 8 meetings a year. 4 teleconferences alternating with 4 face-to-face meetings, and we'd continue, of course, to offer the broadcasting with one tool or another of the face-to-face meetings. So people can not travel to any of the meetings, would still have 8 opportunities throughout the year, equally spaced, to participate. That's my thought, to try to maintain the level of involvement and actually increase the ability for some people to be involved, not just in the deliverables, but also in the governance of the group. Right? Any reactions to that from anyone? No.
Good place to start.
Okay, so we'll start that way. Tracy@omg.org is Tracy's email address. That's easy to remember. And if you need to update your membership, if you want to add an alternate from your company, if you want to suggest other people and tell them, hey, you should belong, and they don't know where to go, they can contact Tracy. And we have a generic address for the chairs. It's cloud-chair, singular, @omg.org. But actually, in spite of the fact that it says cloud-chair, that's because that's a generic naming for any group, and it says chair because some group have only one, some group have multiple. But if you mail to cloud-chair@omg.org, Right now, it would go to Tracy, Carolyn, and me. And after we change it, it'll also go to Dave Harris at Boeing. So it'll explode to us. And then that means the first of us who's ready to respond can respond. And then we can have a discussion with whoever wanted to talk to us. And so talk to the chairs if you want to suggest, things that are governance related, procedure related, meeting dates, whatever. Talk to Tracy if you need assistance with registration or changes, and then talk to each other when you want to on the cloud mailing list. And to be on the cloud mailing list, you can either tell us today, Tracy can take some notes and make it happen, or you can send a message to request@omg.org, and it's a person, not a bot. So you say politely, please, but it's a person. Please register me to the cloud working group mailing list. So that's the basics of the transition. Again, it's like people have actually nothing to do at all if they just want to keep being plugged into what we do, because we did all the migration for people. But it's important to know some of the other things we have here. So any questions about that? And now we're actually ahead of time. So questions, discussion of all this? So we're gonna, we can take a long. We put only a 15-minute break. We will lengthen the break if we need to. That may be actually welcome, as long as you promise to return after the break. So communication materials, etc. So basically, we've got. Come over here, Tracy. Let's switch again for now, because you're going to talk about the website, and you're the one who manages the website. And then when it comes to the wiki page, we can switch again.
Yeah. So we had a website for the CSCC, the Cloud Standards Customer Council. It was at cloud-council.org. And when we transitioned this to an OMG working group, we needed a new home, on omg.org. So our new home is omg.org/cloud. The setup of this page is very similar to other task forces and working groups at OMG. This is a good place, to point people, because it explains our mission and our charter, to publish OMG discussion papers and reference architectures, highlighting standards, standards of practice and opportunities for standardization, promote these papers with OMG liaisons, other SDOs, open source communities, and industry consortia. So on this page, in the sidebar, there's some useful links. We've since added a link to a wiki that Claude and Carolyn put together. Here is also where you'll find, I mentioned, we published 28 papers through the CSCC, so you can access those through published deliverables. And I think these next few slides, that calls it out. So published deliverables, that's where you're going to see those papers. And all your URLs, so if you were participating through the CSCC, or you access some of our papers, all of those URLs are now pointing to OMG. So they should still work, which is good. I did a lot of testing around that. So that's where you'll find them. And then there's a roadmap page. So since we have a wiki on the roadmap page, we might have to just pick one or the other. But currently, right now, it shows papers we want to start working on. And I think some of that will also be influenced by this meeting. So it might be easier over time, for the working group chairs to just manage the roadmap on the wiki. And so we might swap out that link. But right now, it's still in existence, and because we were trying to turn this page into a good home base for the participants. There's also an event calendar on this page, because we have a ton of webinars. We made sure to archive, I think it was the last 16 or 18 months of CSCC webinars. There's the video recording and the PDF download. Because these webinars, what they did was they introduced the papers and walked through them. So some pretty good content we didn't want to lose. So they're all housed here.
They've been vetted.
What was that?
Have they all been vetted, all the papers from the previous group?
Through the Mars task force? No, so,
No, not through Mars.
Oh.
You know what I mean? But like, so in Mars, you know, all of those requests are going to be vetted and voted on.
Yeah.
Were those vetted and voted on or just contributed?
no, different process. So,
Yeah, the CSCC didn't use, you know, there was not a voting process per se. It was a review. I mean, the steering committee decided the program. There was a lead for each paper, and then there was someone assigned to be the lead editor. And basically, once the lead editor said it's finished, it went back to Tracy as program manager to handle the publication cycle. There was not a formal motion to issue the paper and a vote. This is actually one thing that the being in the OMG is going to make it a little more rigorous. They will be reviewed on revision. They're going to be reviewed on revision only. We don't want to create a sudden influx of work of having either to rebrand the papers, change the cover page, change all the references, and re-review 28 papers of 30 pages. It's just impractical. Ideally, this would be nice, but it's too much.
yeah, and I realized we don't have the steps here, but I can walk through this really quickly, and I think it'll get right at the heart of what you're asking. The way it worked through the CSCC, as Claude was saying, there was a lead editor, and it was a 12-week process for a new paper. And it's going to be a very similar process. It's just when we get to the Mars piece, and I'll talk about that in a second. But honestly, that's not challenging because it's not a standard, and they have a lot of faith in the chairs, you know. So it should go right through. You know, given, because also when once we drafted the papers, there's an external draft review process within that 12 weeks, where it goes out to everyone on our mailing list. They have 2 weeks to provide feedback, and then the lead editor has to get all that feedback, work with the team to implement it. So it's, and we try to keep that as open as possible. So if you look at some of the papers that we've written, they've been high quality, and so I think it'll probably stick to the same 12-week cycle for new papers, and that happens to work just fine with the OMG's quarterly meeting cycle. So I think, you know, if you don't get it approved in one cycle, it's just 3 months later. But Claudia, you go in front of Mars all the time, and it's not a tough process. But that will be a new aspect to the publication cycle through the working group.
Yeah, we've got 1 or 2 papers issued in other groups, in other working groups by Mars, even with relatively little review, but at least there's a process there, and the process is going to be more rigorous than it was from that standpoint.
The papers, though, were they actually sent for an industry review, more of an industry informal review?
Across our membership, so whoever, was.
At the external draft level, we use the broadest mailing list possible to send it out to people and say, you now have 2 weeks to give us feedback on that. And if anyone had objected, we would have obviously looked at the objection and handled it. The challenge is not to gain approval. The challenge is to get enough people motivated to spend the time to read the paper and send feedback. You know,
that's my point. That's my point. So on Mars, I mean, there's a vote. So if you didn't read it,
right? So we're going.
Oh, but they're actually good. They're right in that like sweet, or they are gonna read it. But there's a lot of trust because a lot of the people who've been doing it for a long time. You know, how many years have you been involved?
But you know, when I took the data residency paper from the data residency work group to Mars, and I presented it to them for issuance, and they hadn't had too much of a chance to read it. There were still people who, you know, because I sent the paper in the previous day, I think the final revised version, which was in my mind the final revised version. There's still people the next morning who will either had some questions ready or were leafing through it and catching things. So I got out of the meeting with a vote saying it's approved as long as you make the following corrections, and that's what allowed me to follow the process.
so there's no warrants in it.
Warrants.
Well, like
Oh, I know what you meant, sorry, I was just,
all
I took
all
his,
middle
because he
run-
goes
all
through the
middle run
process.
Traffic has to be self-contained inside a container, can't escape.
No.
There are some.
I think
No,
the elaboration
In order to be
process,
safe.
I think the elaboration process of the white papers has been solid enough in terms of the competence and the honesty of the people who participated, and the review by in the past, people like me and John Megan at IBM and other steering committee members, etc. So we're going to, so I don't think we're at risk of inheriting anything that has a serious flaw that would have caused rejection. And within the next 3 years, as we go through the refresh cycle of every paper, they'll have to be formally reissued by a task force, and that will give us that scrutiny, that extra scrutiny. But it's going to take 3 years to do that, because that's basically the refresh cycle we followed in the past, and it's probably a good cadence. We can't go faster than 3 years, because it takes several months to do a paper, and we have to engage with that. And going slower is also bad, because the technology is changing quickly, and the awareness that the customers have of what they can or cannot do with the technology is also changing quickly. So we have to have a refresh cycle. So I think that's a pretty good balance, and that will give us that imprimatur from an OMG task force for all the papers as they get revised.
Is there anything on that that tells us what date the paper is?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's, sometimes the reference architectures is not right on the cover, it's a different format, but all the papers, the cover on the bottom has a month, a year, and.
Yeah, so we actually are going to put a table formally, I haven't yet done it, but on the wiki for the group, we're going to put a table with the list of the 28 papers. What is their latest revision date? What version are they on?
Actually, we're on the wiki
And
section.
then we're gonna use that. We're gonna use that to drive the roadmap. So the group will decide on the roadmap, but we're going to provide this basic information about what is the latest version and revision date of each paper to guide the process. So we do have a wiki page in addition to the public site that Tracy showed you. We also have a wiki page, and we could do multiple wiki pages. For the moment, it's a single page. And the idea is to make it, it's more of a working document for the participants, for the people who are more involved. So for the chairs and active participants. So it's more focused on information that changes relatively quickly, like work in progress, roadmap discussions, etc. So it's located at omgwiki.org/cloud. Basically, we made it viewable by anyone on the internet, but the negative aspect of that was that because we wanted to open it up to be viewable, again, because the process is open, we can't open the discussion or the contribution to everyone, because then we're going to get spammed immediately. And we actually tried to open it up, and immediately there were 50 spammers connecting. So the sysadmin at OMG had to, first he stopped making it visible, and then Tracy went and discussed with him what was the right compromise we could achieve between visibility and security. And so now it can only be edited, and it's not, so it's not like I mean, it's a little bit like Wikipedia in the sense that to be an author, you have to have a login, but you need to request that login. We can give you a login. So there's several of us who are authorized to give user accounts to people who want to contribute. And then those people who are contributors can also put something in the discussion box, which is sort of a sandbox at the bottom of the page for suggestions. And it contains right now some suggestions that I received from people and that I put in there. And if you want to be a contributor to that wiki, as opposed to just a passive reader of it, email us, the chairs, again, cloud-share@omg.org, and one of us will open an account for you, and you'll receive an automated email with a username and a temporary password. It's using DocuWiki. It's not the same as MediaWiki. It's very similar in its principle, but the wiki text syntax is a little bit different. So if you're a Wikipedian, you'll have to learn a slightly different wiki text, but the visual editor is sufficient for most things. If you don't want to do the hard work, which I would understand, then you can just email us and say, hey, I think you should add this or that in the wiki, and we'll do it because we're nice people. So that's what the wiki is about. So we've put in the wiki, a few things right now. So you have the co-chair list, of course, again, and I'm going to put a table of the 28 papers with their status so that it's visible and it's a basis for discussions of the roadmap. Okay. So we're way ahead of time now, and that's partially because you guys are so nice, guys in the generic term. It's not a sexist term. When I say you guys, it means ladies and gentlemen, and anything in between. That's because you're so nice, and you're not asking too many questions, and you're not giving me a hard time. So any more questions and comments about this? Otherwise, we'll just forge ahead.
To get added to your email group, you should let Tracy know.
Yeah. Or that, or another way, if you go to the omg.org/cloud page, there is a join the CWG in the sidebar.
And it'll pull up a little.
It's a little more automated talking to me, but I can do the same thing. So.
Yeah. So, feel free to register yourself and other people are interested. Hopefully don't register people who are then going to say, why am I here? I don't understand why. But if you talk to some of your friends and say, oh yeah, I'd like to know what's going on, send us all the information, and we'll if they want to opt out at some point, that's fine. But we obviously try to be compliant. OMG is very rigorous, of course, about compliance with any anti-spam rules. So we're not going to be bad to people. So if we are good with this, what we could do is, we can continue, and we're 45 minutes ahead of schedule, unless it's my watch. No, my watch is fine. What?
Half hour.
Yeah.
No, you were supposed to be at 3. It's 2:15.
No, but break is in there as well.
Yeah, the break is in. Oh, the break is in there at 2. So what we should do is switch the break in your presentation.
That's what I was going to suggest. And then we can chat about it over break.
Yeah, exactly. So we have exactly half an hour before the break time. So we're going to have Steve Woodward present to us on his work and ISO SC38, and we'll do the break after that. Okay?
Okay.
Oh, okay. All right. So we have your slides
included
in that. So you go ahead and you drive. Just the down arrow button will switch.
If we have one moment, I'm going to try to make this full screen and see if the phone went away. It's not as fun looking at the.
No, it's a little bit small.
I figure we have a second, right? Let's see. And we'll see what the lag is.
So, well, I just got
if it shows
the cover slide in that format just a few seconds ago. So there's a delay but no, it doesn't seem to want to come up and show it. So
it's still in beta, and I didn't even know about this call. I was like, YouTube has a live stream, and I said, I'll go test it out.
Okay, it'll probably
work
out.
Is it Hangouts or is it YouTube?
It's built on Hangout, but it's YouTube, and they call it live streaming. So unfortunately, I would go back to the.
Well, I've got to join the account if you ever want to do something with the live stream.
But see, it shows it in small format. So anyway, go ahead, Steve.
Okay. Hi, well, first, welcome to Ottawa.
Thank you.
So I'm actually from Ottawa. So we got our power back after 48 hours. We were out of power, which was lucky in the grand scheme of things.
Do you have a generator?
We actually borrowed it at my niece's. So that was handy. So we didn't lose any food really. So it was a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. So I put this together. It's going to go pretty fast because honestly, I want time for us to discuss and even time even right afterwards, even at break. I know there's going to be some things for Tracy and Claude even to probably take forward and to kind of think about how to approach, because I do have a few questions and considerations. Okay, so we're going to go pretty fast. Oh, that's too bad. So unfortunately, I guess the fancy scrolling / transitioning doesn't work. Fortunately, this is the only slide where I have this. So basically, I am involved in way too many groups, is what my wife tells me. So she often says, whenever I show one of these lists of the different groups, she says, okay, so how many of those are paying the bills? Can we change the subject? Right now, though, my major focus is actually on things like cloud SLA metrics. So my background is actually doing costing, pricing, evaluation of outsourcing agreements. So I did that for years in the Canadian federal government and also in the private sector and internationally. So a lot of the contributions that I made to OMG have elements around SLAs and metrics. I also did a lot of contributions with TM Forum on the telecommunications side, and I'm still involved in some of the other telco groups as well. Cloud Federation is one of the other hot topics that's coming up right now with IEEE and NIST. So I'm actually participating with them under the U.S. Department of Commerce. One of the kudos that I do have for NIST and the U.S. Department of Commerce, which is not happening in Canada, is there's not a recognition that utilizing the standards has an economic and commercial impact and benefits. So in Canada, that's a foreign concept, fortunately. So it's something I'm trying to change. Okay.
I found in general that the Department of Commerce is doing some really interesting things in the area of information and telecommunications. I mean, you know, several agencies obviously in there, but I'm working with people at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, and they're also being very good at fostering discussions around IoT, around software transparency, etc. So they're a good group to work with.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that they recognize that it's not an expense, not getting involved with standards. There's actually economic returns. And in fact, you're at economic risk if you're not participating and trying to influence the standards. And then the Cloud Security Alliance is the one that you can't read very easily up there. So I'm actually on the board of directors with the Cloud Security Alliance Canadian chapter as well. So, and one of the key things that I do is actually trying to get the different standards bodies and communities to reuse between them. So don't go reinventing the wheel, try to be aware of what each other's doing and try to cross-reference that information and utilize that information effectively. Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, we actually had the SC38 meetings in Montreal. So Canada was playing host to those meetings. And just some of the highlights real quick is that the SC38 community is very much trying to encourage ISO to get more of the standards free under public offerings. So that's one of the things that is continually one of the recommendations that comes out of these meetings is, can we please make now the standard actually available free of charge? So that's good. There is actually a liaison between the OMG and the Cloud Standards Customer Council, and this is something for Tracy and Claude to consider, is that was Mike Edwards. Mike did a fantastic job, but because of the reorganization and Mike's too busy, right now there is no actual formal liaison. So that's something for you to try to consider and be aware of. So right now there is that gap. So I did talk to Mike. said, okay, is there any special reasons? And he said, I'm just way too busy. And just with the reorg, it was just an opportunity for him to kind of step away. So some of the activity highlights then from Montreal. So it's kind of scary in terms of just how many activities are taking place in the ISO world. Really good contributions and participation. So right now at ISO, you've got basically all of the major cloud providers are now actually there in person. So now we do have AWS and Microsoft and Oracle and Fujitsu and et cetera. So it's really good just getting that level of participation internationally. The US have the largest number of delegates, probably. Second is probably China. And then Korea. I think Canada was kind of in the middle of the pack at the meetings. So one of the standards then, so the ones that are closest to coming out, so those ones, these are the ones in bold. So we actually had our meetings, we've actually had our initial kick at the can, provided the detailed draft feedback. It's now gone to vote, was then accepted. So right now, these top 3 ones should actually be out there as official ISO standards, assuming that all things go well. In the next probably 6 months to a year. So those 23189, which is a framework for trust of processing for multi-source data. So this one's kind of a tricky one. This is actually looking at then things like assembling data out of cloud providers and then actually having them resold even, potentially. It's like, yikes. So that's an interesting one.
That particular standard might be worth talking about to the data provenance.
Absolutely,
Working
because data provenance is part of that one, is actually part of it. It's actually called out as part of it. So in terms of it has data use, obligation controls, data provenance, chain of custody, security, and immutable proof of compliance. 22624 actually needed a little bit more tweaking than 23189. It's around taxonomy of cloud data handling. And this is actually where Claude and I were talking yesterday at the data governance session. So that's the document that actually has the concept around geo-jurisdictions. Just around actually clarifying what legal compliance controls are actually going to be applied against and how just a very generic model that I actually worked on. So that was actually my baby as part of that work. 22678, which is guidance for policy development. That document's been around for a while. That one's probably going to be the first out of the box. Very generic, high level, but the fact is you actually had all the countries to agree, overall, in terms of what actually makes sense in terms of policy development. So that's good. Then the other ones that are still work in progress, common technologies and concepts. So this is actually just not around the basic cloud definitions. Time check, yep, good. But it actually is going into, things like, okay, so do we actually have a consistent definition of what's a container, right? And the answer is, nope. So some of those discussions are taking longer than they hoped. Hence, that's still going. Interacting with cloud service partners, which deals with then under ISO, they actually have a slightly different reference architecture than that of NIST. So NIST actually has 5 roles. These guys actually have 3 roles, and then they have sub roles. So you end up having to do a little bit of mapping and massaging. So for their cloud partner includes cloud auditors, cloud developers, and cloud brokers, who in their realm is actually exclusively a reseller. So it's one of those things where you can map to NIST, but you need to understand who you're talking to if they're speaking NIST lingo or ISO lingo, and then you can basically make the shift as needed. It's not a big deal. It's just you do need to be aware of what language that they are speaking. So in their term, partners are auditors, brokers, and developers. And they're actually looking at interacting between basically the cloud service partners and the actual providers. Then we got 23188, which is edge computing, and that they're coordinating tightly with SC41 IoT. And just so that you know, I did actually just look it up on my laptop, that DDS is actually part of the document coming out of SC41 on IoT and edge devices. So it is actually included. They do actually make reference to the OMG and DDS. So that's good. Then there's the service metering and billing. That one's still moving forward as well. Which brings us to the new ones that they actually approved to move forward with. So one of them is around best practices for cloud SLAs and metrics. So this is kind of taking it down to the next level. Right now for ISO, they actually have a series around 19086, which is cloud SLAs. And under that, it's more of a conceptual taxonomy around metrics and SLAs and using them. This is wanting to take it down to the next level where it's actually identifying specific metrics that are going to be used. That one I know I'm going to be involved with. 19944 actually has to be updated and expanded to actually include non-personal data. So what's happened is under the next one, data sharing agreements, they realized that they needed to go and clarify personal data that can be shared, that may need to be agreed upon to be shared, or you might be dealing with enterprise information or organization information that likewise might actually be shared. And as they were putting that scope together, they realized, shoot, we're going to have to go back and actually extend some of the information that we already have in 19944. And then at the bottom, I just provide this link because a lot of people say, oh, well, the ISO things, you always have to pay for them. I don't want to pay my 50 Swiss francs. Well, the reality is there's an awful lot of documents that are actually freely available when you go to that link. Okay. You know, and that includes the primary foundational elements around their cloud reference architecture models and their definitions. So those are covered under 17788 and 17789.
23188.
Oh, I don't know. You can check. Yeah, I'm not sure because honestly, there's a few hundred.
Usually what I do is I Google the name of the standard and I find a vendor website where it's available.
Sometimes, right? or I mean, we laugh at some of the work that I've done with NIST in the past, right? You end up Googling some of the NIST documents and you find that somebody's charging $50 for it. Okay. Other interesting ISO activity. So as I mentioned earlier, there's SC41 on IoT, there's SC42 on artificial intelligence, SC27, of course, security, SC7 systems. Under SC7, some of the ones that actually have some elements that are of interest to the OMG is the 25,000 series for systems quality, and CISC then aligns with the 25,000 series. They've actually generated a few new documents. I actually do have some concerns with those, but they're trying to update them to make them more relevant around quality for the current times. I'm trying to push them a little bit more to even be more current, but that's another story. 19515 is actually the automated function point sizing proposal, which is actually from the OMG and CISC. That's being, looked at in terms of being fast-tracked. Hasn't really moved forward yet in a serious way from what everyone I've talked to. 29110, this was actually an interesting one. One of the leaders around this standard is actually based in Ottawa. And they're actually meeting in a couple of weeks in Quebec City, but it's around software engineering processes and accreditation for very small enterprises. There isn't as much of a direct link here, but I actually found it was interesting. It evolved out of ISO 9000. And essentially what you can do is they're trying to encourage small companies to actually utilize more formal processes similar to ISO 9000 And they're trying to make it so that you can actually get accredited and certified against a smaller set rather than going the entire ISO 9000. So they're trying to make it such that, for example, a government agency, they could, instead of them saying, well, you have to be ISO 9000 certified or ISO 20000 certified, where you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that accreditation, they're saying, well, or you could get this 29110 and get certified just to these 2 or 3 sets of compliance controls. So it's being able to kind of reduce the scope and actually get certification. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. And then lastly, what I thought would be of interest, again, this is being actually led by NIST largely, is that NIST and IEEE actually have this P2302 initiative, which is around cloud federation and interoperability. So NIST actually did start this a few years ago, and I kind of stutter-stepped, for lack of a better description. So right now, they've been working on that. We actually met in Vancouver, was our last face-to-face meetup at the OpenStack Summit. And essentially, this is dealing with then sharing, basically, of cloud at the consumer level. So in terms of agencies trying to have actually a federation, or NATO having a federation. These are some of the scenarios that we're walking through. And also even potentially across providers as well. And as I mentioned earlier, interoperability. ORCA is also involved in driving some of this. ORCA is the Open Research Cloud Alliance. So in terms of the research community, they also want to try to figure out how to actually share and federate and organize and structure things to actually encourage the researchers and different groups to actually share the data. So yeah, so I thought that would be, you know, a good set of information to provide. A little bit of a fire hose, I know.
No, but that's very interesting. I mean, there were some references to things that maybe not everyone in the world knows. You know, you mentioned DDS, you mentioned a few things like that, but it's clear that there is relevance. So there's those things that are strictly relevant to the cloud. And then there are several things that are around it, and of course, there's touch points with everything,
That's
right?
it.
So IoT touches the cloud, and IoT touches this, and AI touches, you know, because there's so much of that stuff that requires big data that needs to be done in the cloud because people don't have the resources at the device or even on premises. So
right.
Everything touches everything. But
and it seems like a lot of the groups have their own preconceived ideas. So in terms of, my background was actually when I was evaluating a lot of the outsourcing agreements, et cetera, was quite often the telco sector. So of course for them, when they talk about edge devices, they're thinking about edge networking nodes at the edge in order to actually then give you a DWDM connect, you know, dedicated connection, trusted connection to the edge of their network, of their cloud, right? You talk to the IoT guys and they talk about an edge and they go, oh, this is my edge device, right? Oh, and each transducer is an edge device.
I was a year ago at the Fog World Congress, or World Fog Congress, and I was struck because you had people from AT&T talking, and you had people from connected car companies talking, and they were both talking about the edge, and it took a while to realize that they were not talking about the same thing.
Right.
Because for the telecom, the edge is the last step before the tower, and the cell tower. And for the IoT people, the edge is outside of that.
Correct.
Back at the operational site, at the car, at the pump, at the factory, and it's beyond the edge of the telecom network. So that made for a lot of misunderstandings.
And unfortunately, technical IT guys, I find, are not the most comfortable at asking questions, right? In terms of saying, well, what do you mean when you say edge? They don't. They'll just run with it, making an assumption that they understand. But you need those discussions and clarifications. Otherwise, you have ships continually passing in the night. having these long arguments and discussions when they're not even on the same subject areas.
So there's lots of opportunities for collaboration here. So one of the things that comes to mind is that with SC38, there's an opportunity for liaison, because now that we're part of OMG directly, we have a liaison process at OMG. And we are able to submit liaison requests to ISO. I did that recently for TC 309 on governance of organizations, as I explained the other day. So we could very well look at, the rationale for requesting a liaison with SC38. When it's an SC versus a TC, is there a difference in what the liaisons are?
I don't know, because basically TCs comes out of the SCs.
Right, because TCs have a class A, B, C, D liaison.
Correct.
And class D is for just one working group, and class A is for an entire TC.
Right.
And
it depends in terms of the organization, the standards body, and the OMG is already recognized under for lack of a better description, a superior class.
Yeah, so which made it easier to do the liaison with TC 309 in the cases that I'm familiar with. But in the case of SC 38, we might need you to tell us exactly what our liaison status should be in your opinion. You know enough about us to do that, and then I'm willing to carry that torch. And of course, my co-chairs can help me too. But because I'm so familiar with the OMG process, I can certainly go through the liaison committee and explain why we should liaise with SC38 and try to push that through.
Yeah, and I'm happy to help. And
So we have some of the documentation from the CFCC as well that I can surface.
Right. For the other committees, of course, you mentioned, and that's less directly relevant to the cloud and to us, but you mentioned SC41 and SC42, where the chairs or co-chairs are people that are involved in the IIC,
right?
With Industrial Internet Construction, which is another program of the OMG. So Erin Borneval from Dell chairs or co-chairs SC41, and Wael Diab from OMG, from IIC, and from Huawei chairs or co-chairs the AI SC42. So we've it's starting.
It's always the same group.
It's starting to be very incestuous. It's starting to be very incestuous. Right. But it's at the same time it smooths the road, right? It should.
Right, because at least you get common thought processes that we might not use exactly the same language, but at least we understand.
Well, it means also if one of these ISO committees is doing something that the IIC and OMG would know not to step over those toes, but to do something complementary or contribute, or something that dovetails but not overlap, and that's what we should do. So another thought that I think would be actionable for this group would be to have might not be a traditional publication like the white paper, but a cloud standards landscape page, something that's basically an inventory of relevant things. And the reason I don't see it as a traditional discussion paper is because it's going to evolve too fast.
Yeah.
So if we publish a discussion paper that we call the Cloud Standards Landscape, we'd have to revise it every year. That may not be, but at the same time, this is not a very complex paper because it's basically an inventory of efforts.
It's a nice idea.
And so we could do an ancillary wiki page. So the existing wiki page, I don't want to make it into a hugely long wiki page. That's not the principle of wikis, but we could have a second wiki page and point to it from the first one and say, this is the inventory of cloud-related standards. And you would put in the ISO standards you know about, and we put some stuff from CSA, and we put some stuff from others, including some national standards, etc. Just like an inventory that would serve as a reference to people. So whenever they write a paper, for instance, they'd be able to go to that page and say, oh, which of these standards should we look at when we write our paper, and which one should we put in the bibliography?
Would be a matter of just retaining realistic scope around it, because NIST actually did do that as part of their cloud standards roadmap. They actually had a listing. This was about 5 or 6 years ago. But then they realized and went, I don't want to maintain this sucker on a continual basis. So it's just, there's just so many of them out there. So where do you draw the line? Do you include all the OpenStack ones? Do you include all, right? So it's just a matter of just putting some sort of scope around it, just so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. But I love the idea because I know myself just with ISO, my head spins. Because unfortunately, the ISO guys, they only talk numbers. They don't even tell you the name. So just like, I don't know what you're talking about.
It's like this joke about people who tell each other jokes by numbers.
That's right. That's right.
And then one says a new number and they all laugh so much. And why did you laugh so much by just, because we hadn't heard that one before.
Yeah. Now, just time check there. We're just.
Yeah, Caroline has a comment. She has to drop out.
Okay.
But she says, please tell Steve that it was a good presentation and I see some opportunities for new papers.
Good.
All right. So go down to the next slide so that we can see the agenda again. And we're gonna break for 15-20 minutes. The break is in the penthouse.
Yeah, it's to hop in the elevator. It's on the penthouse floor, penthouse foyer.
Yeah, which when you get out of the elevator, it's just in front of you. So there's going to be refreshments, cookies, whatever. What is it's Tuesday, so it's brownies or lemon squares? No, I mean we have
Yeah, there's a cadence.
There's a cadence at OMG.
I'm holding out for the ice cream.
Ice cream is Thursday.
I think it's brownies.
Ice cream is Thursday, so I think it may be brownies today. But usually it's brownies and lemon squares. But
sorry, people on the call. Too bad.
Maybe it's maple squares today because we're here. Anyway, reconvene in 15 minutes, more or less. Do what you can to be back. Thank you very much. And then we'll continue with the discussion of the discussion paper and the roadmap. Thank you. We'll keep the session, we'll keep the YouTube open, but there's going to be nothing happening for the next 15 minutes for those of you who are online. But we do hope that you come back.
I'm going to put up a slide that says break. We'll be back 3 p.m. Eastern.
So, Claude, I have to go upstairs. I have to stay upstairs for board meetings. So I probably won't be back. But this is very interesting.
Okay, very good. Well, we need to, try to attract some people. And we can.
Nancy was here from retail. I brought her with me.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
And I told her I talked to you and that you were going to talk.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know.
But yeah, we need contributions and we need people to come with ideas and with needs. Someone can just come with a need and say,
Right.
our community needs guidance on X.
Right.
And we'll take it under advisement and we'll try to propose stuff. So we need to lock.
Well, Joanna Kester from IBM chaired a bunch of the efforts on the art side when it was still part of NRI. So
Yeah.
and a lot of people remember Joanna, remember working with her, so we might be able to actually leverage that connection. She was a great collaborator. Yeah.
Is this room gonna be left locked?
No.
Just checking.
No, so I am getting my 60 cable out. I saw, what's his name, from Boeing, Steve Dupont yesterday. He has the exact same cable as I do, so I hope that's a good sign.
Well, I ended up pulling out my old generic one because of course, the one that came with the laptop.
Yeah, well,
Well, it was shorting out somewhere. Just like, yeah.
I was pleased to see that Surface 3 and Surface 4 have the same charging cable, because I have a Surface, and I was a little concerned that, 1, 2, and 3 all had different connectors, but then 4 had the same connector as 3.
That's Surface. I have a original Surface.
Yes, it did.
I have the Surface still.
Yeah.
That is the keyboard.
He went for I was thinking for my phone.
Managed to get out?
Yeah. I had some coffee and diet Pepsi.
There.
So how was the weather in Toronto?
In where?
Toronto? You in Toronto?
I'm in Toronto next week.
Oh,
I was,
next week,
the
okay.
meetings were actually down in Montreal.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was hot for the first part of it.
Okay.
Because I was kind of feeling silly. It was like, this is way too hot and humid. And I thought, but if they would have had the session in February, it would be minus 30. That would be worse. So,
Yeah, you know what?
yeah. Nothing like bringing the delegations from countries that aren't used to the cold.
Yep.
Because of course they were going, this isn't humid, right? This isn't hot humid, this is fine. The sweat's pouring out. But it is fascinating though, how much, just the US, right, they send 3 or 4 people from the government. That's right. At the ISO meeting.
Yeah, they are huge standards and
They recognize the economic value of actually influencing the standards, And so, we're in Montreal. How many Canadian government people? How many Canadian government participate in the SC38 working group for Canada? It's fascinating, right? And you go, okay, so Chinese government has 2 of their standards bodies here. So we've got competing standards groups there. It's kind of strange. But both of those groups were represented there. In Canada, it's in Montreal. They don't have
yeah, at least you see particularly the year of defense. Everything we do, we have to, get documentation and all that.
Yeah. And it's really, it's very interesting because the editor for a couple of the groups are from NETS, right? And for some of the things, he's got to go, okay.
So
We're back.
if you want
I
to talk
actually
to
have
them, you might want to
We
use
have
my.
several people online.
And at least
And Neil told, I suppose it was meant for Carolyn.
Right? So at least they're
And Neil said, LOL, and then get a drink while you're at it. And I think that's maybe I've been in response to Carolyn saying, I need to drop and head into a client meeting. And he said, get a drink while you're at it.
Which most people don't understand. They're not really responsible for writing this standards. They're responsible.
Actually, we probably need to,
So.
So far, so good.
But then,
I
well,
and I put it in here.
you guys really want this, and it's fun because for a lot of them, I can agree with guys. Specifically, for some of them, it's just like, it's a democracy, right? Each country gets one vote. These guys went that direction for whatever reason. And now it's kind of coming back. Some of the things lately, it's like, well, but don't have it all like that. Don't. So now you've got to write this much text to actually rationalize that concept. And well, if you're that missed element.
And hello to everyone on YouTube. Just collecting ourselves, coming back from the break.
There's 7 people now
Good.
watching. I don't know if they're watching.
Yeah, maybe listening. Yeah.
They're doing their email, they're
Yes.
doing all sorts of things, but at least they're connected.
So we're coming back from the break. It was brownie day, just in case anyone was wondering. Get started in just a moment. And this is Tracy Berardi with Claude, Steve Woodward, John, Draga, Microfocus, Atem from NOAA.
I think Karen has to go. Karen has to go to the board of directors, Karen Chunk.
Okay.
So she can't stay. Caroline Schalk has left the teleconference, but we have, before the break, there were 6 people, including her, and now there are 7 people, presumably without her. So that's actually 2 more people. So if there's anyone new on the call that wants to introduce themselves, please type in the chat box who you are and what your interest is, and we'll share that with the rest of the attendees. Thank you. Give us another couple of minutes and we'll start. Okay.
And after this, I'll listen to this and see how this.
Yeah, that's right, because it's recorded.
From my experience, though, this picks up. It should be picking up.
Yeah, it would be nice to be able to edit that recording and cut out the break part and the beginning, and
Well, and the thing with this YouTube live stream is it takes it and immediately puts it on the channel.
Right. But I don't know if there's a way to edit it.
Probably.
To take a chunk where nothing happens and delete it without losing the sound and video synchronization. That's something that may be worth researching.
Yeah, well, we'll see when we end this broadcast what the options.
Now, the other option that I've done sometimes, well, not too often because of how, it's a bit tedious, but since we have a slide set, is to re-record a soundtrack with the PowerPoint, because there's the record narration option in PowerPoint. So you play the PowerPoint and you record your narration. It creates an audio file between each slide transition, and it creates a folder with the presentation and those files, and then you can actually put that in a .ps file, which is PowerPoint show, and then you can replay that show, and it goes through the presentation with your original timings and the sound. So then you get a whole package thing as a single file, which is .pps file, which is fairly large because it contains an audio track, but it's audio, it's not video, so it's not humongous. But if you have a PowerPoint slide that's half a meg, the combined file might be 3 or 4 meg. But
And were you saying that's something that can layer onto any presentation?
On any PowerPoint, you can do that.
Oh, okay, for PowerPoint. But how does that display to viewers?
Well, you don't.
It's just you as a speaker.
You just
so it's not
So you just put it out there. People download it, and when they play it, it plays from the start with your timings and your soundtrack. So sometimes re-recording something is cleaner than a live meeting recording. Sometimes. So, but it's always a little bit of work, and I don't always do it. So, guilty as charged. Okay, well. Okay, so it's 3:10 p.m. Eastern time. And so we're going to restart. We're actually ahead of time on our agenda. If you look at the agenda here, the break and the presentation from Steve were supposed to collectively end at 3:30. And so we're 20 minutes ahead of time. But I don't think anyone is going to blame us if we free them at the end of the day, 20 minutes before the planned time. So we have 7 people online, and we're back with like 5 people in the room for now. So we're gonna talk about deliverables. Okay. So there's this slide which we called concept of operations, which is a little bit of a pretentious title, but it's about the process of discussion papers. So we're gonna basically amend the process of writing and publishing discussion papers as little as we can and just as much as is needed to conform to the OMG processes. So we will discuss the roadmap as a group, clearly, and we will take, everyone here has an equal right to make suggestions about what we should put on the roadmap, no question about that. But in the end, the chairs will say, okay, we publish the roadmap that was decided, and we launch each of the paper efforts. And an effort may be the writing of a new paper, or it can be the revision of an existing paper, or it could be other things we don't know yet, but initially it's maintaining and enhancing, if necessary, this family of papers we have. That is and this is what this slide about, the discussion paper process. So suggestions should be made to the chairs, or they can obviously be made live in meetings like this one. When we've decided that a particular project of writing or updating a paper is going to become active, we're going to call for contributors. Who is willing to contribute? And we need 1 lead editor, and we need any number of contributors. As Tracy said earlier, most papers have had 7, 8, sometimes as many as 10 contributors. People that have had revisions have often contributors to the revision that are a little bit different from the initial contributors. So when you're on version 2 or 3 of a paper, you may have a total of 20 or 25 people who've participated through the life cycle of the paper. So obviously these people tend to be the prime suspects to write the revision, but anyone can join this effort at any point in time, even if they haven't contributed to the previous version, by responding and say, yeah, I'm in. Usually at that point, we hold we facilitate the process of the lead for that paper, to convene those contributors to a conference call in which we discuss the outline of the paper that often has been proposed by someone in the first place, or we discuss it dynamically on the call, what should be the outline of this paper, and then we tend to assign authors to each section. It's usually worked really well when a paper has 6 or 7 sections or chapters. You end up with 2 or 3 people who volunteer to contribute to each of the sections, and then we tell them, hey, work together. If there's 2 of you, call each other. You don't need us, etc. And we sort of assign sections of the paper for people to write. And once these drafts are being published and being assembled, anyone can, of course, contribute, etc. So in order to facilitate that process, we found that Google Docs works pretty well. There's all sorts of systems for collaborative authoring, but the one that's the easiest for people to adopt, that requires practically no training and gives really dynamic collaboration features, is Google Docs. So if it's a paper revision, what we do is we take the old Word document, we upload it to Google Docs, it converts it to the Google Docs format that allows people to really edit, comment, etc. And then when it's finished, it's got to be downloaded back to a Word document, at which point it's lost a few of its editing features, like the tables might be a little bit messed up or whatever, and then we just do a pass of editing to restore all that stuff. It's tedious and not very interesting work, but the important thing is during the collaboration process, if we keep emailing back and forth Word documents with change tracking in them, that ends up being a mess because everyone is manipulating multiple separated edits and merging them is difficult. With Google Docs, you could have multiple people working at the same time in multiple sections of the document and without hurting each other. And even if they were to happen to work in the same section of the document, you see the other person's cursor, you see what they're typing, you can sort of step away, let them finish their sentence before you go in there and attach a comment or something like that. So we found that to be really working very well. Once we reach the stage when we have an initial draft, we really ask for all the other members of the team that's working on this paper to review it and edit it and make comments, etc. Then we ask the authors and editor to make another pass and create a near final draft, which we call the external draft. At that point, we send a message to everyone again, just like we did at the beginning, asking for collaborators. And this time we say, okay, the external draft is ready for review. And we give people a period of time. I don't remember if we give 1 week or 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks for anyone out there to comment and send requests. And we can actually enable, in Google Docs, you can open a paper for comments without opening it for editing. So if you don't want external people to mess up your paper, but you want to receive their comments, you can choose that mode, and then the comments accumulate, and then you can do a pass of resolving them. Once we get to the final draft that has taken into account the external review comments, and assuming no one says this paper shouldn't go out because it's mortally flawed, then at that point the paper will be cleaned up editorially, and at that point one of the co-chairs will take it to the task force, which will usually be the MARS, Middleware and Related Services Task Force. Occasionally it might be another one, and will conform to the process that task force requires so that they review it and vote on it to issue it with an OMG stamp on it. At that point, usually the task force will say, hey, there's a comma missing here, or here you should replace the word this by the word that because it's not clear. There will be some comments. Usually we can get a vote of approval that is sort of conditional to making those edits. If not, we could sometimes have to skip a cycle. The other thing we can do, since the Mars Task Force typically meets for several days of the week, sometimes almost the entire week, we can maybe sometimes what we will attempt to do is get on their schedule early in the week, present a paper, get comments, so that we would have time to make revisions before the end of the week, before the end of their meeting, and go a second time in front of them and say, here's the revised version. It takes into account the feedback you gave us on Monday. Today is Thursday. Can you please leaf through this, make sure that we've changed what you wanted, and approve it now, just to avoid losing an entire meeting cycle. And we've gone through that in some other working groups. I think we understand how the process works, and we also have, at this point at least, one of the Mars co-chairs knows us pretty well and will be helpful to us. Who's the second co-chair of Mars now?
Sure.
Peter Deno?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know Peter as much, but anyway. We'll work with them, okay? And if we have to miss a cycle, we'll miss a cycle, but that's obviously not what we want in general. At that point, once the paper is finalized, it goes through. I'm not sure exactly how much the Marcom team does about changing. I'm sure they check a few things, but they don't really have a lot of resources to. So we need to really produce something of high quality, so that OMG can put it on its website and, if appropriate, make as part of their press releases, as part of the OMG Engage newsletter, as a link on the website, etc. They can say, OMG published this new guide on blah, blah, blah. One thing that is different in terms of the content of the papers between a CSCC practical guide or white paper and a CWG discussion paper is because we're part of OMG, we actually do have a responsibility now to look at opportunities for standardization and call them out. Under the CSCC, we were sort of staying away from trying to influence the evolution of standards. That was not our job at CSCC. OMG is a standards defining organization, so now it's an extra freedom and also an extra obligation. If we want to say in a CWG white paper, there should be a standard about X, and here's the right maybe OMG task force that should do this, or we should take such and such work product from another organization and try to make it into a standard, etc. We now can do that, and we could potentially be called upon to draft something for an OMG task force to release as an RFP to solicit a standard, or we could say, we think that this standard or guideline or whatever adopted by another organization is a perfect candidate to become an OMG standard, and it is already adopted as a de facto standard by some people, and it has no competition, then we could even transform it into an RFC, a request for comments, which means it just gets reviewed and it gets approved if it's true that it is non-controversial and ready for consumption. So now we have the ability and to a large extent the responsibility of considering the standardization process as we write papers. So as we revise some papers in the future, which stayed away from talking too much about standards, we actually, we were the customers of the standards, not the authors of the standards. Now we can be the authors of the standards if we wish to. So as we revise papers in the future, we need to remember that now we can, it's no longer an excursion outside of our responsibility. It is within our responsibility to talk about standards if appropriate. And then the other thing that I already discussed in response to John's question earlier is that the legacy papers, which there are 28 of them, will be rebranded as OMG discussion papers as we revise them, and not just on the website. I mean, they'll be rebranded as OMG discussion papers, period, upon revision. And if we maintain the cadence we had before and we revise every paper roughly 3 years after the previous revision, then it means that by the end of 2021 or early 2022, all the papers will have an OMG cover and will have received a vote of approval for the issuance of the revised version from an OMG task force. And then we'll be fully back under the process. But there was a discussion of rebranding all 28 papers, but that would have required the task force to consider an omnibus motion to approve all 28 papers. There was no chance that that motion would have been voted on with full cognizance of the content of 28 papers, because that would have been almost 1,000 pages. So that vote would have been meaningless. We would have asked people to say, trust us, there's 28 papers. We want to say officially that they are OMG papers and give them new OMG numbers. And people would have had to close their eyes and trust us and vote. And we had the risk that people would have said, no, this is not realistic. Don't ask us to vote for something we haven't had a chance to read. So no, we're not going to vote for that. And then that would have looked like a failure. So there was, why ask to be slapped in the face, right? So we decided, no, we're going to do it pragmatically. Every time a paper comes up for revision, we'll go through that process.
Should those be moved so that it's clear that they're legacy?
There's some language where the papers live on the news site. There's blurbs. These were written by the Cloud Standards Customer Council, and this is now under the purview of the OMG Cloud Working Group. The papers will be published as OMG as they go through the
So that's made clear. That's not made clear on the paper itself because the paper is, you know, the same PDF that has been on the CSCC website, and
Each paper's landing page has that same language.
oh, good.
Yeah.
So basically, the answer to John's question is yes. This is made clear to the readers. So is that clear to everyone? Okay. So in terms of the current queue of things to do based on that principle, we have 4 papers that are up for revision now, more or less, and we have 4 that have been proposed. That may be actually a bit too much work to do very quickly, but here's the situation. The practical guide to cloud services agreements, the practical guide to CSA, which I personally had a hand in writing or editing that one, is currently on version 2, and we need to write version 3, and it was the last steering committee meeting of the CSCC back in the spring had said we should do it in the 3rd quarter of 2018. As you're very aware, the 3rd quarter of 2018 ends in exactly 2 days, so we need to push that to Q4. And the next paper is called Public Cloud Service Agreements, What to Expect and What to Negotiate. So it's a deeper dive into what a CSA contains, especially in terms of SLAs, and you know, what are the common practices? When can the customer push back and ask for more? When is it unrealistic to be able to obtain more, and therefore the customer should sort of take whatever mitigation measures they can if they feel that the provider is imposing their own terms. These two sort of go together, but we had planned for the one on what to expect and what to negotiate to follow the other one by 1 quarter. So I don't know if it's realistic to do both in Q4. It could be that the Q4 18 paper slides to Q1. It's a little bit too early to tell until we've assembled the team to revise it. And we also have to remember that the 4th quarter is a little bit short because basically by the 15th of December, people start saying, I'm not available anymore. But at least we're, you know, if we agree that these are indeed the priorities simply because they're up for revision, we need to launch at least one of those 2 soon. And I had actually thought of launching or calling for contributors for the PGCCSA, the Public Guide to Cloud Service Agreements, in early September, just after Labor Day, which was 3 weeks ago. And I didn't do it because seeing this meeting approaching and being in the process of selecting co-chairs, etc., it seemed a bit rushed to make an arbitrary imperial decision on my end. I wanted to wait until we had this meeting. But if we agree, we'll launch this within days. Then we have the Practical Guide to Cloud Management Platforms. That is also 3 years old and is coming up for renewal. And then we have a Practical Guide to Platform as a Service that is also, but we know that they're coming up, but we haven't selected a time frame. I have a suspicion that if we start with the other 2, then those 2 are probably more realistic for Q1 19, not for Q4 18. But you know,
And since they're updates, it's more.
Since there are updates, the work is slightly less, unless the technical context or the marketing context has changed drastically. The updates can be relatively minor. Basically, it's like, what have we learned in 3 years that causes us to change this paper? What new offerings or new directions have we seen? What new standards may have been done? So in particular, the ISO work, even though it moves at a glacial pace, within 3 years, there's some progress that's been made usually. So we need to take that into account too. But the amount of revisions that need to be done is completely variable depending on how much the situation has changed within a given paper's scope. And then we have some new suggestions. So we have a suggestions for a paper on cloud delivery platforms. The situation on cloud delivery has changed fairly significantly over the past several years, because now we have, I mean, we had just the notion of containers at that point, but now we have containers as a service. We have function as a service. We have virtual machines, but we have nested virtual machines. And we also have bare metal servers, a favorite concept of IBM, by the way. So this one is the Carl Scott paper, right?
Yes, actually the slide right after this.
Yeah,
Carl
exactly.
Scott
Okay, so I have a slide.
everything.
I have a specific slide on that one. That's right. Thank you. I mean, I made it yesterday, so I should remember. We have another proposal which comes from Ash Hida, who is Wipro. I always hesitate because there's Wipro and TCS, and they're the two big Indian outsourcers, and I always risk confusing one with the other and really getting people infuriated at me. But Ash Hida is from Wipro, and he is big on the cloud governance, and he's proposed a paper, and it turns out that Caroline Schalk from IBM is also very focused on that topic. So the two are willing to sort of lead that paper and get us something about this out. There was a request for an AI reference architecture, I mean AI in the cloud. Who did that come from?
Yeah, so as we were winding down the CSCC, we've done so many architectures. This was just part of the brainstorm around new architectures. AI and resilience. So I'm not sure we have those same leads anymore on this, so we didn't want to drop them.
No. They need to be on our radar screen.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling that we're not as ready to launch an effort on those two as we are with cloud delivery platforms and cloud governance, because we have identified leaders for those two. The first two here under discussion in the second section, but we don't have, we would have to sort of revive the discussion with whoever had raised the last two on this page. So to give you the details about the cloud delivery technologies paper, so again, this is proposed by Satori Consulting. Carl Scott works for them and proposed this. So the summary is that basically you have two bullet lists on this page, right? The first bullet list is what are the implications of choosing a particular delivery mechanism? What are sort of the things that may get fulfilled more or less well, depending which delivery mechanism or platform you choose in terms of security and compliance, performance, elasticity, and fit with a particular software architecture. The choices you make have impacts. And then the choices, the potential options are at the bottom of the page, and they're, bare metal servers, VMs, nested VMs, containers, and serverless. And, who knows, maybe when we open the call for contributions, maybe we'll have someone coming and saying, oh, I know about another emerging cloud delivery technology option that we need to use. And so basically, this is sort of a big matrix that's going to tell us, okay, you have these options, you have these things, these desirable characteristics of your deployment, performance, scalability, et cetera, and these are the things that work more or less well for the following reason. So you as a customer, as someone who maybe wants to migrate to the cloud or adopt the cloud, based on these implications, here's the deployment technologies or the delivery technologies that you need to consider or not consider, and the risks that each of them presents or the opportunities they present, etc. So, Carl has the rest of the information, obviously, on what he intends to put in there, and it wouldn't just be Carl; it would be Carl plus some other contributors to be chosen. I know that in the paper on cloud migration that we did last year, there were several.
Actually, this year. Spring.
This year. I thought, okay, well,
Me too.
yeah, I mean, I know because I was editing it,
Yeah.
so I didn't remember it was early this year. I thought it was end of last year. So anyway, I know that there was a serious discussion of cloud delivery platforms in the cloud migration paper. So one of the possibilities is that if Carl leads this paper and it gets written and published, we're going to have to go back to the migration paper, even though it's not very old, and update it to avoid having two places where cloud delivery platforms are discussed potentially in different terms. So we might have to reissue the cloud migration paper, remove the discussion of the choice of delivery platform from the migration paper, but make a reference to the new paper, because that paper would then be referenced from various other paper. Every other paper could potentially say, okay, at some step of the process, you have to consider which delivery platform you're going to use. Please go to the cloud delivery technologies paper to choose your delivery technology. So there's some, when you revise one paper, it might have a side effect on other papers. We'll need to consider that. But on the other hand, it also means that the migration paper contains some base material, and we can say you can almost start the cloud delivery technology paper by extracting that from migration paper and starting from it. So there's work to do, but it sounds very interesting. I don't have a similar slide for the cloud governance paper. I haven't gotten that yet. But Ash and Carolyn had a phone call a couple of weeks ago, and they already discussed between them what is their common understanding, and they reported the call as having been, productive and positive. So I would trust them to lead that. So we also said it wasn't written in the previous slide because that just came up in a conversation I had with David and Carolyn last night. That basically each paper is going to have I wouldn't say a sponsor necessarily, but maybe it is a sponsor as one of the three co-chairs. So each of the three co-chairs we're going to make sure that each paper has one of the three co-chairs as someone people can go to if they have a question, a conflict, or whatever. So we're going to try to shepherd to steward those things. Maybe we should call ourselves the stewards. I don't know. Or shepherd is not bad either but anyway.
Do you have any perceived scope around the cloud governance? So in terms of just thinking of Wipro and IBM, is it from their application outsourcing?
I think they take a broader view than that because they say we talk to our clients and we see what our clients are doing right or wrong about their internal governance of their cloud projects. At the same time, because they're both vendors, I think it's very important that real clients be in the authoring team as opposed to IBM and Wipro telling us
this is the way to watch us.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, I'm not accusing them of dishonesty, but they're going to have a certain bias in there, and we need to avoid it. So the answer is I don't know, and the way to know is to discuss it with Carolyn and with Ash, or wait until they launch it and then say yes, I want to work on this, but have you in the first discussion say we need to have co-authors who are actual users. So that's I can't give you a better answer than that right now. We can certainly give you I can certainly give you Carolyn's and Ash's email addresses to just toss the ideas around, right?
Governance of what?
Yeah, exactly. But basically what I can also ask Carolyn and Ash to do is to write a slide similar to this one and publish it, and say, okay, here's what, basically this content we could put on the wiki page under the mention of the new paper and do something similar for governance. And then that would make it visible to everyone. And we could say, okay, this is the scope of
Usually, before we send out a call for contributors, it needs to be cooked. so we have an outline. It's so much easier when you're trying to get everyone together and figure out what sections.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is to say, what is the need?
Yeah.
Which is which Carl called the pain point. And then what is the purpose of the guide, which of course is to solve the need. But then the next step is usually to say, what do you have in mind as an outline?
Mhm.
And then at that point, we really are ready to say who's interested in it. And of course, people say, well, I still don't understand exactly your scope, but at least that starts the constructive discussion. People can start getting on a conference call, discuss the scope, agree on the scope, revise the outline to meet the scope, and then allocate the work and start doing work. And sometimes the Google Doc starts with basically just an empty outline, or an outline with just some notes from someone saying, oh, here we should talk about this, and we shouldn't forget that, and we should reference standards this, etc. And it's just like an editorial comment. There's no other text, but that gives you the starting point, and then people start typing in there, you know. It's very open. So if I go back to, yeah, so this is the status, if you want, of what we think we have to do. Now there's another piece of work that is not a discussion paper per se, but the one that we mentioned earlier. If we want to do a cloud standards landscape page, I can certainly initiate it on the wiki, and I can put the content of your slides with the list of ISO numbers that are relevant, but then I'll need help to populate this further. And then we'd have to go through the bibliographies of some of the papers that we have to basically do a compilation of the various standards that have been mentioned in the bibliography of the existing papers, because there's no need to reinvent that. It's already in there. And then we would expose that page to everyone and say, please comment and tell us what we should add, delete, and modify.
Just have to be careful, because I remember when this was doing it, everybody was sending everything. So it was a major thing.
Now, if it's already been done by NIST or by someone else, then, okay.
Yeah, so it has to be revised.
So it has to be revised.
Now, I just actually looked up the SLA guide.
Yeah.
The Practical Guide to Cloud Service Level Agreements.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, well, probably not a lot has changed, but the major thing, because I still think in terms of the core of it's still true, in terms of they're still written protecting the cloud service provider, not the customer. You know,
right.
A lot of those elements are still true today as they were.
Yeah, it's still vendor biased. Yeah.
Right. So that part's true. The only thing that kind of jumps out was one of the things I think Mike Edwards stuck in. That was around the 19086 standards, right? It's still work in progress.
Yes.
Those ones are no longer work in progress.
Right.
Those ones are now finalized.
Yeah.
So we could actually provide a reference.
Yeah.
Right. So relatively minor change.
But it's still yeah. So and maybe the changes in that particular paper are not going to be that big, but we need to go through it with a reasonably fine-tooth comb.
Absolutely.
So basically, the work of the contributors for revision is first to read the paper carefully, and it's usually, you know, once you omit the appendices and the cover page, it's 18, 20 pages of meat, and you actually need to reread those pages. It takes a few hours to do it carefully with a red pen in hand, and you need to say, here's the things that need to change. And that's what we'll need to do. And then Steve has already identified one thing to change, and maybe we'll identify very few additional ones or a ton of additional ones. I don't know. So that leads us to the roadmap, basically. So I don't have a separate slide for the roadmap, but basically here is the material to discuss the roadmap. So I think this practical guide to cloud service agreements needs to be, the revision needs to be launched very soon. And I could launch it and ask for contributors, or anyone who's on the call right now or in the room who wants to take the lead on it, will support you, but we'd be very happy for someone else to assign that to themselves if they want to. Are you a candidate, Steve, or are you?
I mean, I've been involved.
You're gonna contribute to it at least, yeah.
You know, so I mean, that's something that I'm willing to help on, because I had my fingers in version 1, so.
Okay, so maybe you and I will collaborate on launching it and asking for contributors and contacting all our friends, etc. And the rest of you who are listening to me online or in the room, if you know people who are, you know, keenly interested in cloud service agreements, there could be a lot of people in the retail world who are interested in that. There could, you know, maybe you know, some of the Department of Commerce people want to know what's going on with this.
I remember maybe 2 years ago now, we did some work with GSA. They were investigating cloud service agreements.
And the Canadians probably have a slightly different perspective on it, simply because the providers are somewhat different, or if the main providers that are used by Canadian organizations are in the US.
There's opened up data centers in Canada, but then they still actually are subject to US disclosure orders.
Right, so there might be something that a Canadian customer, or for that matter, a customer from any other country, wants to ensure is in the cloud service agreement because of the cross-border situation, and most American clients don't think about it because they say, oh, I'm in Philadelphia and my provider is in Mountain View, California, and I'm fine with that. But so anyway, we need to try to enlist the right participant in that one. We could say that the second document on cloud service agreements basically needs to follow the first one, so we could sort of pause it until we're farther enough advanced with the first one. Partially because it's going to be the same people, so we cannot enlist the same people to update 2 documents at the same time. They need to be substantially finished with the creative part of one before they can plunge into the second one. We could launch cloud delivery platforms using Carl Scott as the lead. And we could launch cloud governance using Carolyn and Ash as the leads. That would give us 3 papers in progress in parallel. That's plenty.
Yeah.
That is plenty. But it might not be the same contributors, which is good. But from a stewardship purpose, actually, you know, if Carolyn is involved in cloud governance, if I'm involved in CSA, and if, let's say, Dave Harris wanted to get involved in cloud delivery platforms, we could we would have, you know, three co-chairs, each sort of watching over one paper. We'd have 3 separate teams of contributors, and we could say, you know, do your best to do this in the 4th quarter, but for the new papers, it may be a tall order, in which case, if you finish in January 19, that's fine. And the other, is we have a total of 8 here, and I just talked about 3. The other 5, you know, the one on what to expect and what to negotiate for CSAs would sort of naturally immediately follow the first CSA paper, and the remaining 4, we re-examine them at the next meeting. I mean, not at the interim conference call, it's probably too early, but at the Seattle meeting, we say, okay, now let's look at the, you know, assuming the first 3 are in progress, and we have a plan for what to expect and what to negotiate, we can look at the other 4 and say, okay, when do we, you know, can we schedule them for Q1 19? Is it still too early, etc., and work from that. And then meanwhile, the wiki page on cloud standards landscape, that's sort of an administrative task that I can perhaps do on my own, or and certainly have Stephen help me with it in the meantime. Tracy, you want to say something?
I was just gonna, there's a site I haven't been to in a while, cloudstandards.org, and I'm wondering if that was the same project that goodness, ISO folks had worked on. Because the CSCC papers were up there, links to them, and I'm on your laptop, so I didn't want to pull it up, but we can check that out. Yeah, that exists. So.
Okay.
Oh, right now, because I've had a quick look there, but again, who's updating it?
Yeah, and I'm not sure.
You pay to get on the list?
Right.
Right. I mean, yeah, exactly. So we have the credibility that we're, you know, an open organization with hundreds of members, and we're neutral. We're vendor neutral. And I think we've established very well that we are vendor neutral, in part because of the process by which we do standards. And we have, you know, people who, you know, chairs of groups, etc., who can maintain pages. And if it's a wiki page, it's easy to maintain. I mean, I'm not going to do a polished, super sophisticated website. An extra wiki page is perfectly fine to do this, and I'm willing to start it. So, is there either online or here? Is there any either consensus or debate or discussion about our roadmap?
I would just add, I know you mentioned it earlier, but also on the omv.org/cloud page, it says if you have suggestions, which either send a note to Cloud Share.
Because we want to put them in the pipeline.
You know,
we want to put them in the pipeline so that every time we can do reprioritization.
Yeah.
Just like I'm presenting.
It's really exciting when they come in.
Just like I'm presenting 8 possible papers here. Mm-hmm. Well, if next time we have 12 in the list and we need to prioritize and say realistically in Q1 19, and we do 2 more, and then we wait until the Reston meeting and we say which ones are we going to do in Q2. That's a good process to me. I mean, and if some papers stay in the list for quite a while because they don't percolate up to the top priority, maybe that tells us something about whether they're really that needed or not, and we can, you know, but you know, any thoughts here today? Okay, so we're gonna, you know, that's sort of a management action, if you wish, or a chair action. I'm gonna talk to Caroline and David, and I'm going to say, okay, between the 3 of us and the people who have suggested some of the papers, so Ash Hida, Carl Scott, contribution that Stephen can make to the cloud service agreements, etc. We need to launch these 3 things, and we need to sort of start issuing the calls for contributions. Maybe what we'll have to do is do a single call for all 3 in order to not give people email fatigue, or 3.
We can talk about that, yeah.
You know, we need to think about it. Is it better to launch 3 emails or to launch 1 email with 3 topics?
And I think it depends on, you know, where in the hopper each one is, and in terms of the outline, and so we do want to have that outline with the lead, put the outline on Google Docs, have a kickoff call where the lead gives some context around the paper, and then you give people about a week to come back and say, yes, I'm interested in contributing. Put me on your list here of contributors. And then it's every 2 weeks that the lead schedules a follow-on meeting where everyone gets together again and they make steps towards the drafts. And again, working on that like 12-week or 9-week. So depending upon where the outlines are, because it seems like we're close on cloud service agreements, getting that out, and we're close on cloud delivery platforms. I'm not sure cloud governance is that they need a little more time, but.
Well, I think Caroline and Ash, go ahead.
You could slide back up. So there's a number of things that we've discovered in trying to run IOP on cloud. And for the most part, it's all fine. But there's some cloud vendors that don't comply network standards, so it makes it difficult. For example, DDS about what you want to talk to?
No, but just.
I'm being very diplomatic.
It's the fact that the same message, if you can't connect, doesn't matter how good it is, but.
Yeah, exactly. So where would that go from since this thing gets vetted by Mars, right? So we're already aware of some cloud technologies that don't work.
So I think what
They're
you would,
relatively minor. I mean, would we call that? How would we deal with that? I don't want to name names here.
no, I understand.
How would we call that out of the paper? But I know one particular implementation that just you couldn't run DDS, couldn't run certain parts of IOP. We worked around it. But
So one option is to write a new paper and say this is called the the cloud communication requirement paper.
Middleware communications requirement.
But it needs to have cloud somewhere, obviously.
Yeah.
But cloud middleware communication requirements or something like that. It could be a fairly short paper, and it would call out the data communication standards and protocols that the cloud provider should support in order to be a good player. Another option is to do a revision of an existing paper, for instance, the practical guide or one of the other adoption paper, and say, I'm going to add to this paper consideration of the protocols being supported, either in an existing section of the paper that could be about that but hasn't broached that topic, or add a new section in the paper and say, basically, in this revision, we added guidance to the customers about how you should evaluate a vendor's product.
I'm thinking it goes in this one.
Yeah, okay.
Because we fixed the elasticity problem for IOP, right? And although I don't know that can't say that it was fixed in the standard way, but we did fix it. And we detected certain rollouts that didn't work.
So a customer needs to have expectations, like what would they expect
So I say which one it is?
out of cloud provider? If you have some reasonable
It's Pivotal
expectation,
Cloud Foundry.
yeah, so if he,
Which interestingly enough, IBM has got Bluemix,
Yeah.
which is also a Cloud Foundry base, but IBM fixed all the network issues. So
Okay.
you have UT and TCP routing with Bluemix, which is also Cloud Foundry base, but you don't have it with.
I mean, would you
Now
go
they
into,
did just fix part of it, but you still have to work around it.
would you have all of the Cloud Foundry offerings under this cloud delivery, or would you just maybe even have a separate paper just on?
No, it's just that
Cloud
vendor.
Foundry.
It's not Cloud Foundry that's necessarily involved. Cloud Foundry is like a spec. It's like an open source project, right? And then each individual vendor write as much or more as. It's just that.
Yeah.
Fiddle's implementation didn't do a complete job of it.
So without being, I mean, the solution is clearly not to attack a particular vendor. It's to educate the customers about what they need to have in the product
Consider.
as
evaluate.
a selection criteria.
Stack.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So again, I think I'm open to, I'm not going to decide exactly what form it should take, but it could take the form of a separate paper.
So who's responsible for this one, David?
No, this one has been proposed by Carl Scott of Satori Consulting. You have the name of the company at the bottom right there, and it's carl.scott@satoriconsulting in one word.com.
In a common section, 2 sections in the papers, CFCC papers, there's usually considerations, important considerations, and then, what's the other one?
Something new. Agile.
And like suggestions.
Well,
And
but
like
it's
things to
you.
consider.
Most of the papers are organized in a series of steps. They say, it's a 6-step process, a 9-step process, or it says, in order to do X, you need to do this, 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 this. I mean, the practical guide has 10 steps, the security guide has 6 steps, etc. Now, it's not a rule. I mean, it's not everything is a step process. But again, the question is that consideration. Basically, what you're saying is experience has shown that there is a risk of selecting a technology that doesn't support certain data communication protocols, and we need to warn the users to pay attention to this.
But they're not fully routed.
Right, or we need to tell them, you know.
You could lay that out.
Yeah.
UDP must be fully routed.
Right.
Otherwise, you're not
exactly.
But you're going to hand this over to Mars. Mars is going to look at it. And may not catch that.
So Mars might be totally happy with having a new paper that calls that out. The question, I know, the question becomes, then if you read another paper, could you inadvertently ignore that particular, you know, protocol stack issue because it's not referred in the old paper? So
that's why I think it belongs right under
the yeah, but you may want to look at some other papers too and see if they actually will need to have a revision that calls out cloud delivery. But just like I said earlier, maybe the migration paper will need to be modified to refer to this one, which will be richer. Maybe we actually will need to go back to the practical guide and say V4 of the practical guide needs to have a sections, and it'll be, the practical guide is more for the business decision makers on migrating to the cloud.
The practical guide, I know I actually stuck in with the network and the connectivity. It's one of those things that upsets me. When people kind of go, don't worry about connections. You don't understand. It's like water in your pipes. It's automatic. You know,
yeah, right.
Flows,
right. Or
like,
the technical people. No, the answer is the IT people will take care of it.
That's right. That's right. But I agree. In this list somewhere, at least, you know, and I recognize it's going to be a high level at this point in time because this is just a proposal going to Mars, is my understanding. But there should be a connectivity aspect or something.
Okay, so that's super useful input, John. That's very useful because it tells us that Mars cares about this for obviously good reasons, and that we need to find a way to deliver that message to the users. And it could be that this paper is the appropriate opportunity to do that in a relatively near future. And that's good. And when we issue the paper, we could call this out in the press release. You know, we could say, in particular, this paper calls the user's attention to you know, issues they can face if they don't verify that a provider supports a complete stack of a complete protocol stack, including routing, etc. So we can say that, we can facilitate that that awareness. Okay, so we're going to put John and Carl in touch with each other and get them to talk, and then that may actually that may actually
I wasn't doing my mail.
that may actually be very helpful to Carl to know that there is another person who's identified who has ideas about the content of the paper, because for now Carl was a loose electron there, and a pair of electrons around an atom is a lot more stable than a single electron, as we know, as some of us know. Okay, so that's good. That's a very, very, very good discussion about the roadmap so far about this. Any other ideas? Any other thoughts and concerns?
I just did do a check on the NIST standards roadmap where it actually had the listing from 2011. Standards 500-291. So
there was a special publication?
Yeah. 500-291. I mean, it was a really nice list, laid out really nice. It's just, it's 7 years old.
Well, that's the problem with a publication, is you give it a number, you spend 6 months getting the secretary to approve it, or the undersecretary to approve it. You publish it, it becomes a PDF you can download for the website, and then it stays there forever. And I'm thinking, let's do something simpler and let's try to maintain it. And if we do a wiki page, we can go in and update it, and we'll have the traceability in the wiki, the history. Every time someone adds something, we'll know who added what when. And they can even, if they're good enough, go to the bottom box where you're supposed to enter the reason for your change. But even if they don't enter the reason, we'll know who added what.
Yeah.
So we can
Self-service.
Yeah. And we can have any number of people, you, me, and others, with a login ID for the wiki, capable of going in and updating that page.
I like that. You really don't want to. I remember how much of a pain it was. Just no. No, you're not standing still. You're standing. Okay, so I got it.
Right.
No, it's not.
Competition.
So, ah.
Tell them you have that taken care of. That's right. Not to take care of you.
We'll make Gerardo happy, and who's replacing the person who shall not be named, the person from AD Link who is actually someone who can have meetings with other people without ending up with blood on the floor. Who's your who's the DSPC co-chair, the new co-chair?
You said his name.
No, Gerardo is from RTI, and he's one of the leaders, but Angelo got out because you can't have Angelo in a collaborative process. So he was kicked out and replaced by someone else last time, but from someone else from AD Link. And then you have the Nina Tucker, or from Twin. Anyway, never mind. We're not in this is not a DDS meeting. This is a cloud meeting. So that's great that you found that, Steve. And the fact that the NIST cloud standards list has not been updated since 2011 tells us something about what processes work and what processes don't work. So I hope we can do better than that.
And we might consider, the reality is we have these 28 papers, and we want to keep them updated every 2-3 years, and maybe we could build up the number of chairs and volume, but we might also have to consider taking some of our own down, perhaps, or discussing that, if the information's wrong, or we'll see when we get there.
Well, there could be some mergers too. There could be subjects that get closer as the technology evolves, and then we combine those things.
Yeah.
I don't mean to keep talking, but
No, that's fine.
I read this, the disclaimer, and
The OMG stuff.
no, the cloud working group on those papers, whatever.
This is written by the CWG.
Yeah, it kind of says it. It doesn't necessarily say that it's not embedded. I'm just saying. It's probably fine, but we might,
Well, and so
maybe
the
it's like
owns the CSCC too, copyright. That was part of it too, because we did say that we only need to go to lawyers.
That's what it says.
I mean, actually,
it doesn't say that those are legacy documents.
Okay, we can look at the language, and we can perhaps fix the language. We discussed, I mean, the fate of these papers was discussed with Char Wales, just to make it clear. We didn't make a unilateral decision on how we were handling them. Tracy and Char met, and I also met with Char in our preferred venue, which is a Wednesday evening reception with a glass of wine in our hands, and we said, what are we going to do with these papers? And Char actually was one of the people who pushed back and said, we're not going to go through the process of systematically reissuing the 28 papers now as Mars papers. It's too much work. It's too unrealistic. So now you have a point that we should make it clear which...
We talked to the OMG management too. OMG owns CSCC and the
Right.
trademarks.
Yeah.
So they said there are papers. So, and those that.
But look at the language, or I can help, or we can look at the language together and see how these papers are described. And we can also check with Char whether she shares John's. I mean, I'm not questioning John's opinion, but see if there is an improvement of the language that would make it more clear in the future which papers have been reviewed and vetted, in John's word, and approved formally by Mars versus which ones are legacy papers inherited from the CSCC that have not gone through the OMG approval and release process and issuance
And when
process.
when they do come forward and are published in the discussion paper, that whole landing, the whole thing will be different.
But
They'll be all
the cover
copyrighted.
page will have a Mars document number, and
Exactly.
that in itself
Right.
indicates that it's been
Right.
approved.
Right now, they're all CSCC
Right.
documents, CSCC copyright, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I take the point, John, and we'll look at how we can accommodate it without creating an administrative nightmare for the people who handle documents. Okay, any other suggestions? And the people online, please type in the chat box if you have suggestions.
Still 6.
Yeah, I know. So who has any further input into the Cloud Working Group roadmap? I know there's a delay on the on the web
Yes.
podcast, so that's why I'm pausing, because it'll take 10 or 15 seconds for them to hear what I just said, and then it'll take them time to type what an answer if possible, so if appropriate. So I don't want to jump immediately to I have heard nothing, because maybe some people are still listening to my question and typing a reply. And because we don't have that many people, maybe now that we know we don't have that many people, we'll go back to a GoToMeeting session next time, because we have a corporate GoToMeeting account. It'll be sufficient for this, and then people can unmute themselves and speak, and that'll be better. But we did a trial. That's okay. Okay, so you can all speak up still until we close the meeting, but so face-to-face, so future meetings, I mean, I talked about today, so I want a little bit of feedback here. This is sort of free-for-all a little bit. Was it useful to have a face-to-face meeting? I mean, should we continue to have, even if it's just a few people, a face-to-face meeting at each quarterly meeting? You're not Steve, you don't make many OMG meetings, right? You can't.
I was at New Orleans. And
Okay.
the rest of the time, whenever having to present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I guess personally, because I run into this with the other groups too, is getting the face-to-face time is always good. Right? You know, just so even if it's a small group of 2 or 3 people, you can just set aside 3 or 4 hours to get together and work on content and focus. Right? That's always, I find, really beneficial. Right?
Yeah.
So even if it's a small group, so even in Seattle, even if it's only 2 or 3 people, right? Still, I mean, if you just sit in a room and just say, fine, we're going to focus in on this one report for a couple hours.
I'm new to your group, but I know for the retail group, it has been helpful, certainly for me, to be more engaged with the content. I mean, remote meetings are also good, and I think more frequently it kind of keeps momentum, whether you do it face or conference call.
So we need this cadence of this regularity of bringing people together.
These things kind of current in people's minds.
It was my hope that it would, that's why I absolutely wanted to have this meeting. Even though I've been working with CSCC fairly closely for several years now, I wouldn't say frustrated, but maybe a little disappointed that we were not having those. I would see John Megan periodically because we would have some events at which he would come because we would talk about, we would have some forums where he might be, etc. But I wouldn't see the other people very much. Okay, any other feedback at that?
That's the first time, so.
Well, next meeting is in Seattle. I don't know if you can come, but the one after that is in Reston. So hopefully we'll see you at the meeting in Reston.
I get to this, it's the second one, I think, so we get to the feedback and more meetings with them. So.
And that's still okay. Well, we still need you to say what you need as a user, absolutely. And since
you can just tell them some things. I know personally. And Claude did a very nice job on this article. Like, sometimes I'll go down this one road, I was like, where the hell are you going?
By the way,
So periodically do that sanity check, right? Because otherwise you're gonna write a document that really sounds great to Claude and I, but when everybody else reads it, useless.
Stephen is referring to the fact that he wrote an article for an upcoming issue of a journal of business technology by the Qatar Consortium, which is a small group of, a small family of consultants headquartered in Boston, but we're all over the place. There's about 100 consultants in it, but there's several other authors we solicit. And the next issue is on data governance. Steve wrote a paper related to the geo-jurisdictions notion that he talked about earlier in the framework of ISO standards, and how this notion of geo-jurisdiction, so the intersection of geography and legal rules and laws in various within various boundaries, impact the ability to manage data, and in particular to share and exchange and store data. So that's related in this case to data residency. But the paper has 5 articles on various aspects of data governance, and I'm the guest editor, and I wrote the editorial just the other day, and everything is apparently they're waiting for just one final version of one paper, but the rest is already in production. So, and they go very fast usually at that point. So I would expect that it's going to come out next week. So that's one more thing we can put in our respective resumes. One more published paper, check mark, publish or perish. Not exactly, we're not academics, but anyway. So
do you have the dates yet for Reston?
Yes, we have the dates for Reston.
Week of March 15th. I'll double check it. We do. Pull up my calendar.
I'll go to the OMG website on my browser.
It's the week of March 18th.
So, yeah, so obviously it's too far to choose the specific day. It'll depend a little bit on what other meetings are planned that day. For Seattle, which of course, so I'm going to need to choose we're going to need to choose a meeting date pretty soon now. I'm typically busy on Mondays because that's typically the day for the business modeling and integration task force. So Tuesday is likely again, because when we have those special forums on something, they're usually Wednesday or Thursday. I think we're doing Wednesday for the IoT meeting that Meg is planning.
Yeah, because there's IoT and there's data governance. I think one's Wednesday, one's Thursday, right?
Okay, so I'll probably choose Tuesday again. So it might again be, I don't know, if we want to have Europeans on the phone, maybe we should do Tuesday morning in Seattle, because we're in the Pacific zone. So, here we have the advantage to some extent that, yeah, okay, it's 10:20 p.m. in Paris, but that's still feasible for people to be online if they wanted to, and it's 9:20 in the UK. But if we did that when we're in Seattle, it might be too late. So maybe we need to shoot for Tuesday morning, 9 to 12, and then we could get a reserved table at lunch so that the people who attend can continue the discussion, of course, without the remote attendees, but by being together at one of the lunch tables. And we can try to do it that way for Seattle. So we'll do that, and we'll do a go-to meeting, I think, to allow people to participate remotely, and we'll see how that goes. And we encourage you to invite your friends and even your enemies.
And I think it'll be interesting, because we're talking about the two special events planned for Seattle, IoT and data governance. I mean, cloud fits right in, you know, so who knows what will pollinate before, during, after, you know, in terms of people coming into the OMG meetings from, you know, Boeing, Microsoft, and Amazon, and, yeah.
The other thing is, yeah, because Dave works for Boeing,
Yeah,
he's right next door.
yeah.
So we're at least going to have Dave Harris at the next meeting, and hopefully he knows enough people in the area, including at other companies. I think he knows people at Microsoft. So if there were people from Microsoft Azure coming, that would be good. And there's people at Amazon who are also in Seattle that he could be involved. And there are people at Costco that I think is headquartered there, and they have some interest in cloud issues, as they should. And so that takes us back to the retail world.
Security Alliance headquarters.
Oh, wow. Can you mention it to some people you know? Can you send an email and say, hey, by the way, we're going to be in your area in 2.5 months, and we'd love to have you participate. So tell them it's tentatively December 11, Tuesday, all morning. And having had a slightly longer meeting today, I think a 3-hour meeting next time will be enough to go over where we are. A bit of a repeat of the rules, etc., for new people, some introductions there, and then we'll plunge again into the roadmap. Maybe you know, a bit of a more of a working session about what should be the scope and the content of certain deliverables. Maybe have each of the teams working on a paper at that time present to us the status of their work. If we told Caroline and Ash and Carl and etc., okay, you get 20 minutes to show us the outline of your paper, show us even by scrolling through the Google Doc what you have right now, what questions you have, what issues you're facing, do you need new contributors, are you in good shape, what you expect your schedule to be for the issuance, etc. That would be a good review. And if there are 3 papers in progress, in 1 hour, we can review those 3 papers, right?
So we also have a partnership with AWS and Azure.
Okay.
So I can reach out to them and see if they're available.
Absolutely. Please do that.
Yeah. Well, it's actually the Cloud Security Alliance website. Yeah, I'm going to actually pay Cloud Security Alliance.
If you can't hear this on the phone, basically there's a bit of a side discussion between John Draga and Stephen Woodward about who they know in the Seattle area, AWS, Microsoft Azure, etc., who could be invited to come to the Seattle meeting in December. Okay, so should we have an interim conference call just to see what's going on, in particular with the launch of the new papers, etc., sometime in between? I would think so. We don't need to decide exactly on a date now, but if we say there's, we put it roughly in the middle of things, that would be probably the first week of November. So there's a week of October 29th. And so maybe the end of that week or the beginning of the following week, we'll convene a conference call. I need to look at my schedule because we were just talking about another conference call this morning. We were going to do a webinar on data governance at some point. So I want to wait until that's decided in the next few days before I can do that. But I can probably, and there I'm it's sort of useless to do a doodle poll between 300 people. So I'm gonna just need to talk to Carolyn and David and make a decision, and whoever can come, and then that we'll try to see if it's a go-to-meeting. I don't remember if we have the ability to record.
Yeah, the only thing with our WebEx account is it has a
WebEx
cap on 25 people, so we might need to give.
But if we judge from today's attendance, that might be enough.
Yeah, it's been enough. Well, I know we did things different like CSCC, but when we had called for contributor teleconferences, the 25 was enough. And then that would, whittle down to the 7 to 12 people that said, yep, I really want to do this after hearing more about the paper, seeing the outline. So it's been okay so far. And
we could always borrow the IIC WebEx account that is
right.
the one that's
200 or something.
100, I think, or something like that. So we have some solutions there. Yeah. So we'll do that, okay? And then we can always make another decision at the Seattle meeting. We can again ask the question the same way. Okay, what should we do in early February between the Seattle meeting and the rest of the meeting, etc.? We don't. I mean, it's good to sort of know that we have this intent, but we don't need to make it we don't need to put it to carve it in stone. We can be very agile and make a new decision every time if we want to, including choosing a week or choosing not to do it or not today. We also need to see when we do that first interim conference call how many people come, whether it's really useful and whether it made things progress or not. Because if the problem is not the number of people, it's quality can be more important than quantity. But if it doesn't advance anything, then there's no need to worry about it.
Yeah, and we might find if you have 3 parallel projects, for each project there would be all contributors and then up to 3 drafts shared with the same working group. So.
Well, the other thing you realize is that by saying to people, we're going to have a conference call the week of October 29 as a progress report on everything we're doing, it sort of pushes those people to actually make progress, right?
I mean, you could send a calendar invite to the list, maybe put them on the calendar the next 6 months out, here are the 2 meetings. So then you get that communication out of the way.
And it pushes people to have something to, Yeah, exactly. That's the problem also.
I gotta get my homework done.
I mean, we do have this problem in some OMG meetings that do not meet outside of the physical OMG meetings that they, 3 days before the meeting, they're like, oh gosh, I haven't done my action items. And they scramble, they do their homework on the flight to the following meeting, right?
That's why I also think it's been useful. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this, but we implemented a project plan PowerPoint with the CSCC. So when you have the call for contributors, the lead comes in with that PowerPoint, and as part of that, it has an outline of the paper. And here's a slide where we're gonna have the contact info of the contributors. Here's what our timeline looks like. Here's what we're shooting for the drafts. Here's what we're shooting for publication, or now it'll be for submission to Mars. And then for every meeting, it's 2-week cycles, they have that PowerPoint, updated. And so it keeps everyone on track too, because you have those stakes in the ground. But I would encourage, if that works, and we don't have to use the same thing, but I think that was helpful for.
So I just put in my calendar, 14th of October, I'll be reviewing the SLA document.
Okay.
Touch base for.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Any other questions or suggestions about our process?
Anyway, coordinate with Shar about the Tuesday meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't want to be in a Mars meeting. So like if they break out, if they break out for IDLs for Java, that's good because I have that covered for the non-developer.
Okay, so tell Char
worked out
to,
perfect.
tell Char not to steal, or not to tie up John Draga at that time. Okay. Well, you know,
For trying to schedule.
tell Char to make sure that she doesn't do anything that prevents people from attending.
Ideal for John. I'd have to attend that one. I'll talk to her.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, you know, I don't, the problem when we talk to Char is,
Tough, because I imagine, you know, like we're talking about this, there's some of the stuff the DDS guys are gonna worry about the cloud as well.
yeah. So yeah, sure, maybe not put DDS there, because if we're reviewing the status of the paper on cloud delivery platform, then the DDS people might want to come over. Well, the other solution is that when we have meetings like that, and there is one section of our meeting that is of concern to another task force, we designate that as a joint meeting. And they come in for just that part of our schedule, and then they can go away. So we could say we're going to have the cloud working group, and we're going to have a lot of, you know, process stuff at the beginning and introduction. We're going to have a lot of roadmap work towards the end. And then in the middle, we're going to review our upcoming paper status, including cloud delivery platform. And Char says, okay, that's also a slot on the Mars schedule, and the Mars people can attend that. So people move from one room to the other, and then an hour later they move back. That sometimes works. Well, it depends on the interest that people have. So okay, you talk to Char. I'll also mention to her probably tonight at the chairs dinner. I'll mention that we did that. Good. We'll try to coordinate. Meeting weeks are very difficult to avoid overlaps between different task forces. You know, so many things going on in parallel. But yes, we'll try. Thanks for the input. Anything else? Okay, so the final thing, and we are now 45 minutes ahead of time. I've never had that happen in years in my meetings. Is general Q&A feedback. So let's go around the room simply and give everyone a chance to say, did you learn something today? Were you happy with the meeting? What did we miss? What should we do better next time? And, you know, so at time.
Let me pull out my notes.
Ah.
I think the big thing I'm taking out of here is the governance, and particularly for the data, because that's something that we, as part of our class strategy, has not really been defined. So that's something that I'm going to be taking back, making sure that we think about that way ahead. Of course, we talked about the standards. That's something that we have to think about as well. The upcoming roadmap, the procurement portion of it, it's going to be very handy for us, because we are now developing what we call the utility procurement handouts, which is, yes,
Concepts of operations.
Right, which will drive the way we will procure the cloud services. And if there is something already in the pipe with regards to agreements and all that, either we can provide input if we are ahead, or we can use, your document and help us, in that procurement, developing and implementing those agreements.
Well, the existing CSA paper version 2, even though we're going to revise it soon, already contains a lot of stuff that can, and the revisions will not be super major. We're going to, update a few things, but I think that paper is one of those where the revision cycle is going to freshens up a few things, but you can already derive a lot of benefit, I think, from the practical guide to cloud service agreements. And it will also already contains a lot of stuff about these are the things you need to look at, and these are the things that should be a concern to you in the procurement cycle.
It actually has a lot of main areas. It's just a matter of, hey, the standard wasn't being worked on 2 years ago, now it's 9 months. And then other areas it kind of touched upon things like the data governance. But again, it's going to not going to add a lot more content. The overall message are covered from secure what policies you're going to have in place for data governance.
And then one thing that has not been discussed here, which is it's not defined yet, at least at NOAA, is the role of systems engineering, the cloud, migration.
You're smiling.
Yeah, because actually, in my business, I'm just actually thinking about working sessions on cloud SecOps. Right, cloud, just kind of bringing that element of the systems engineers. So I want to bring the word engineering back into something as opposed to crowdsource.
In the last paper we published at the CSCC that a fellow named Bill Van Order from Lockheed helped us with was a workforce paper. How to grow and develop and grow a cloud-enabled workforce of the future, and talking about all these things, DevSecOps and with the Google SRE and all that stuff. So you might like taking a look at that. What are the new skill sets needed for cloud?
But the systems engineering aspect is a little bit more, I guess, technically specific than that.
Yeah, because again, we're going from a stovepipe environment to an enterprise environment that we still yet to define before, and we're doing that in parallel with the cloud migration. And the challenge that we have is we have IT saying, oh, this application, you just can migrate, don't worry, it's going to work.
Oh, famous last words.
And it's going to work. It's been proven. Blah 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 is doing it, and we're saying
No, it's working.
we have an operational environment. Even though it's stovepipe, it's meeting the customer's requirement. So there is an operational baseline. Even if you're not going to go through the requirements, but you have to have metrics that prove that you can meet the operational baseline, and that's the dogfight that. That's right.
So that's why I said earlier that we fixed the elasticity problem, not necessarily standard. Right? So we put a piece in front, proxify IOR, and secure it. Right? But it's proprietary. So you get a form spec, an IOR, everything's standard. We had to stick a piece in front of it. Now, that piece is probably tactical. I don't know if I can say it's strategic yet. I've decided to.
Well, and one thing that didn't show up on that list of things to consider is the resiliency, redundancy, and what we call COOP, which is the backup operation. And that's something that's really.
Yeah. So there is, there are a number of considerations that are outlined in the choice of technical solutions in various papers, and we haven't used the phrase systems engineering for the cloud, and perhaps we should have. But the various aspects of that are touched on in different places. Maybe we need in a future revision of one of these things to give it a better focus, and maybe we need to call it systems engineering for the cloud. I don't know. But I think that if you look at the Practical Guide to Cloud Computing, which is the first document, but it's revised twice. So version 3 is was done at the end of 2017, actually. So it's recent. Because version 1 was October 11, version 2 was end of 14, and version 3 was end of 17. So the document is less than a year old, and it's gone through 2 revisions, so it's pretty solid. This is really the fundamental document to start from, and it's the thing that each of the other 27 documents essentially is a deeper dive into one aspect of the practical guide. So I would encourage you to start with that and to socialize it to your colleagues who don't know about it, and then to see what holes it has for you. What does it not satisfy for you? Where is the guidance missing? And if you tell us where you think the guidance is missing, we'll either tell you, here's the other document that you should look at because it does, in our opinion, address the point you see, or we'll agree with you that there is something missing, and then we can put something on the roadmap to fulfill that. But this sort of feedback from a user organization is absolutely fundamental to our process. This is absolutely how we should determine what we need to do to serve the community, right? So I'm really encouraging you to go through that and then give us the feedback after digesting at least the core document, which is the practical guide.
The other interesting thing that might be worthwhile looking at on the engineering side. So the ISO standard actually came from IT, which is telco engineering. So for their enterprise architecture for cloud, it's actually based on more layering. So it's more of an engineering layering model first. And then they actually have, as I mentioned earlier, one of the partner roles is called the developer role. So they actually have more elements around engineering than the NIST reference architecture, because the NIST reference architecture is actually more focuses around roles, right, and activities. Where the ISO one, because the fact it came from CWG, it's got more layering. So I always, because you guys say, oh, which one's best? No, there's one that's best. It's a different perspective. So if you're talking to engineers, when they actually look at the ITUT models, quite often they can move faster because you're dealing with their section. But in this model, it doesn't talk about that at all. Right? It talks about the roles, right, and the interactions and activities between the roles. So, and I would just say it's worthwhile just to see. I'm not saying all the answers are there because it's still really high level, but you know, just to get the perspective.
Thanks. My takeaway is I got to talk to send this slide deck. That's all you. And I could just.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm thinking we can take these slides from today, put them on the wiki.
I would make them an OMG document.
Oh.
Do we have a, if we make them an OMG document, what prefix do we use? We don't have a.
CWG?
Do we have, do we?
I don't know if Jürgen made it yet. I think we're.
But we should, because we can put, I mean, the agenda is part of the slide, so there's no need to publish the agenda separately because I included this agenda slide repeatedly highlighting where we are. So we don't need to publish the agenda separately, but we could publish, CWG /180901, and it would be this presentation. And then Steve Woodward, his slides are included in there. So we only need one document to capture everything. Everything is one document. Thank you, Tracy. Okay, your turn.
Well, there was a lot of takeaways for me. I kind of fit in a unique spot where, Vertex provides some cloud functionality, but yet we consume cloud functionality, from other vendors. So we're also exploring things like Cloud Foundry. There's a lot of things that we're doing in the development and architecture group. So I mean, I'm interested in everything really in this whole genre. There's a lot of things I think our organization could learn from the standards documents that are already out there. I know that, we internally had written some white papers on some of these topics, so there might be some crossovers and things that I could share of research that Vertex has already done. I'd have to cover that with them, but there may be some information that we can share from my employer. But then the other hat is working with the retail task force. There are some things that maybe I can take from this group and pass along, what the working group is looking to achieve and take that back to.
So sometimes some of the best advances in our work, other than writing the papers, comes from a representative from one group making a presentation to another group to socialize something. So if retail wants a presentation on what cloud is doing and is offering, you just need to let us know.
Okay.
Because as long as we find a slot in the agenda, half slides will travel, right? I mean, I'll go to the retail group and I'll just talk about what we're doing and field questions. Conversely, maybe the papers you were talking about and the Vertex contribution could be the subject of a presentation, just like Steve today gave us a half an hour on the ISO standards progress. Maybe you can do the same thing for us, or one of your colleagues can do the same thing for us at another meeting.
Yeah, I know when I was in Boston, we had a presentation, the gentleman's name slips my mind, but he did he was from IBM, and he did the full presentation on blockchain. And it was probably the best presentation I had ever heard. It actually made sense to me.
Which is hard. Which is hard for blockchain.
Yeah,
yes, I know.
right. So it actually made sense. He had some really great examples, and he used examples of oranges on orange trees. Not just because I'm from Florida. That's not why it made sense to me. But the whole, how you can trace that orange, through the chain, through the truck, through the the plant, and to the store.
And you need, exactly.
It was a really great example. So, but there are a lot of things that, I want to go and I want to look at all the documents that the prior group has written and see, and then see if I can contribute or, add any value just based on some of the things that I personally have done in the past few years with, working within the cloud. And, Vertex has taken some applications into the cloud as far as proof of concepts. I've gone through several iterations of taking applications that were more traditional,
right?
In-house.
So the practical guide to cloud migration, is that what it's called?
Migrating apps to cloud.
Migrating apps to the public cloud. I think it says.
Oh, there's two migration papers. Migrating apps to public cloud services, roadmap for success, and then migrating apps, assessing performance and response time.
Oh yeah, okay. So there's two papers specifically on migration. So these might be very interesting for people who have something on premises and are like, okay, should I migrate? Should I not migrate? And what should I pay attention to if I want my migration to be successful?
Yeah, and that would have been a really good paper 3 or 4 years ago when we decided to take our application to the cloud to see how that would. And it was interesting, the comment. Oh yeah, well if it works in house, you should be able to just go ahead and implement your database, put everything in the cloud. It's all going to work just like as if. As you had it in your.
But I mean, then.
Java, why wouldn't it?
Yeah, right. Then, even if it's too late, if you want, it would be great to have someone who went through that pain to read it and tell us if there's something we missed.
Yeah. Well, it's been interesting that I'm sure with different vendors, you're going to have different problems. So the particular vendor that we use, we have some very specific problems. And it was also because I think we were groundbreaking with them, whereas maybe had we gone with maybe a different vendor, had we started with Cloud Foundry instead of
You mean they were
using some-
debugging their cloud with you as a guinea pig?
I know, can you imagine?
Surprise! I'm shocked.
I won't even say who they are, because I'm not allowed to. It's okay, I tend to get in trouble. I tend to get in trouble. But no, it must have been fate for me to just see your, the cloud working group and the agenda for the LG meetings. It kind of fits in really well with kind of
Good.
where I am and where.
Well, then,
hopefully I can help
please socialize it, to the extent reasonable, to spread the message, and then invite people to give us feedback and to contribute. It's a club where, it's almost like a potluck dinner here. It's like you need to bring
a friend and bring a dish.
Yeah, exactly. Bring a friend and bring a dish.
Cocktail.
That's a great slogan.
Yeah.
You had Karen that was here earlier, and she has been really great with the retail group because
She came from it. From us.
she's brought in a lot of external folks, into our meetings, and she's been really great with the networking. And this is only my second LMG meeting, so. But I am looking forward to either going to Amsterdam or Dublin, either one. I'm totally down. So that sounds like.
Oh, of course.
So I'll be staying with LMG for a little while.
Well, there were a couple of years. I actually looked last night at the list of past locations for meetings, and there were like 3 years where we had almost no meetings outside of the US for budget concerns, basically. And then the board at one point put its foot down and told the powers that be, no, that doesn't work. You become too American. You need to have meetings outside. And so that restarted, I think in around 2013. So 5 years ago, they restarted having some meetings outside periodically. So now it's about every other year there's a meeting. And of course, Ottawa is close. It's not a travel problem from the US. It's just that, for instance, government people sometimes need special authorization to travel outside of the country, even especially given the way the relationships between the US and Canada are going right now. But at least this year we're having the Ottawa meeting, and next year we're having a European meeting. And last year we had a Brussels meeting, and the year before we had a Berlin, or 2 years before we had a Berlin meeting. So anyway, we're trying to do that because obviously there are lots of people outside of the US who want to participate. There were fairly frequent Asia Pacific meetings years ago, and then we don't do them anymore. And I think
it used to be instead of quarterly, there were 6 meetings a year.
Right. Yeah. When there were 6 meetings a year, there were like usually 2 meetings outside of the US in the year. But that dates back to 2006, 7, 8, and then we dropped to 5, and then we dropped to 4. It was too much for people to travel to 6 meetings all around the world. But
it's good too, just finding out what the others are talking about. Even last week's ISO meeting, right? Because Canada's really very much in terms of privacy protectionism,
right,
especially the government space. And then talking to the EU guys, they were saying we just passed legislation. Basically, it's this data set you actually have to make it. It's actually a legislative requirement. It has to be open to all governments within the EU. It's like, wow, that's cool, right? It's a different mindset.
Yeah.
Right? Well,
yeah, what's interesting also is the vendors' reaction to things like GDPR, and that has an impact on cloud delivery, obviously, and cloud, the choice of cloud providers and where they are located and where they're going to put your data. Because, actually, when the first discussions occurred about GDPR, which was in the summer of 2015, the first reaction from a bunch of providers in the US was, oh, this is going to kill the cloud. And, okay, so there was a really bad reaction. And then they evolved from draft to draft, and they probably fixed some of the most egregious problems, etc. And now you have people like Satya Nadella, who I heard at a conference in Paris in May, who said GDPR is a model of a good legislation on data governance and protection, and we are fine with it. And of course, the marketing people told him to say, we're already applying it, you know. But he said, I can see that everyone is going to emulate it. And guess what's going on? You now have several governments around the world that are saying, we're going to take GDPR as a model. We're going to tweak it for our local specificities. But basically what you're going to find is in 10 years, you'll have a lot of the governments in the world that will have adopted a slightly modified version of GDPR, with the great exception of the US, obviously. Although a change of government could change that too. But anyway, so this whole thing about how you manage data in the cloud and what you need to pay attention to, and what are some of the, again, the things, what to expect and what to negotiate about what the providers offer you, etc., is really important. And we're trying to shed light on it, you know. Stephen, anything else?
So yeah, so my takeaway was, it's great though that I think you're worthwhile reaching out back out to ISO, IC38, that figure what's the appropriate mechanisms.
Yeah.
So, and then take
I'm gonna ask if Wendy can wanna be our new liaison.
maybe we'll.
No,
I have to talk to my wife.
No, I don't blame you. I will pull up our documentation. Yeah.
I like some of the new proposals, you know, so it was just interesting just to see, you know, around the resilience, cloud governance, cloud options. But again, have to kind of figure out what's realistic, right? Don't get so many cycles, everybody's the same way. Yeah, and also the idea of having some sort of cloud standards matrix listing that might be self-administered. Just sticking a caveat, just saying, they're bad everywhere, not plus or something, but something that nothing else explains people to. And I do like your suggestion around using cloud standards community. They actually have one on their website.
Yeah, just to check it out as part of the, yeah.
And yeah, look forward to helping out with the SLA piece where I can, trying to go and make sure that things stay coordinated. Standards. I want you.
John?
I think the agenda's good. It's good timing for us. I've done a bunch of R&D on the cloud, trying to preserve some of that and make sure we're not too concerned about proprietary solutions, but we're trying to publish the things that we've done so that we can, Mars is dead. Go to cloud. And look forward to contributing to it.
Great. So can we see how many people do we still have online?
6.
Okay. Taking the delay into account, can we have in the chat box any feedback from the audience online? Either a question if you have one, or feedback about what you took away from this meeting and you know, how it helped you or didn't help you. Anything is valid. If you want to stay silent, you have that right. It's like the Miranda rights, you know, you have the right to remain silent. It's not an admission of guilt, but we'd like to have some feedback. If you're not all asleep or have left your computer unattended and gone to the coffee room, but so we'll wait a minute for any comment to appear in the chat box. Tracy is watching intently, trying to telepathically cause comments to appear in the chat box. And
from Harmon is going to be on.
I'm sorry?
I knew someone from Harmon that was going to be on.
Okay.
I don't want to call out anybody particular, but
Oh, no, we want to blame them if they're there and they're not saying anything, but, so I don't know if I take this silence for lack of interest or that everything was perfect. I doubt that everything was perfect.
and it looks like from this side, we can't see who's actually logged in, which is fine. Yeah, but
Yeah, we'll
It's a
do,
good
we'll
test
do
for
better
us,
with
yeah.
GoToMeeting. That was an interesting experiment, but so it's too hard for the remote people to make themselves known and for us to know who they are and for us to let them speak. And the delay doesn't help.
The bug with display.
Yeah. So we're going to leave it at that. We're half an hour ahead of schedule, but that's fine. I don't think anyone is going to blame us for that. So thank you everyone for attending. There will be a call for attending a teleconference probably in the week that straddles October and November, to be determined. I need to talk to my co-chairs about that. And then we'll meet in Seattle for those of you who can be there. And we will broadcast the meeting again to allow remote participation. But if you can come to Seattle, I know Seattle in December, bring your umbrella. And thank you for your collaboration and thank you for any contribution you can give to the papers that are on our roadmap. Have a good rest of the day or the evening. Thank you. Thank you, everyone here.
Thanks.
I'll let you close here.
I'm gonna hand out some business.